The 2-minute rule. You stare at the task again. The email you haven't answered. The paper sitting on your desk. The dirty dish in the sink. You tell yourself you'll get to it later. Tomorrow, maybe. But tomorrow becomes a week. A week becomes wait. Procrastination doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it slips in quietly, hiding behind small things left undone. The 2-minute rule cuts through that fog with a single question. Will this take less than 2 minutes? If the answer is yes, you do it now. Before your mind builds excuses, before hesitation multiplies, before the simple becomes heavy. It sounds absurdly small, but that's why it works. The human brain resists starting far more than it resists continuing. Once motion begins, inertia carries you. You answer the email. And then, without planning to, you answer 2 more. You wash 1 dish, and suddenly the sink is clear. You file 1 paper, and then the whole desk is clean. 2 minutes is short enough to dodge resistance, but long enough to break paralysis. You aren't negotiating with your future self. You're tricking your present self into action before it has time to argue. But the real cheat code hides deeper. This rule isn't about the 2 minutes. It's about training identity. Each tiny task you complete rewires something quiet inside you. You stop telling yourself you're someone who puts things off. You start becoming someone who finishes things quickly, effortlessly, automatically. You don't need discipline. You need less friction, less negotiation, less pause between noticing and moving. Because often it's not the big things that weigh us down. It's the tiny things left undone for too long. And when you begin to see how small actions create motion, you also start to notice how this same principle works far beyond your own tasks. Because sometimes, before big doors open, all you need is a tiny favor to gently push them. Ask tiny favors first. You approach someone for help, a stranger, a colleague, a friend. You hesitate. The ask feels heavy. You worry they'll say no, so you start smaller. Could you hold this for just a moment? Mind if I borrow your pen? Do you happen to know where the meeting room is? They say yes, and something invisible shifts. This is the power of asking for small favors first. Psychologists call it the foot in the door effect. But beneath the term is something older, something rooted in how trust forms, how bonds build, how resistance melts. When someone grants you a small request, their mind begins to adjust. They see themselves as helpful, cooperative, open to you. And once that identity takes root, larger requests no longer feel like leaps. They feel consistent with who they've already chosen to be. The cheat code is not in manipulation. It's in understanding momentum, compliance. Like motion, accelerates. One small yes invites another. The hardest door to open is always the first. You can use this anywhere. Negotiations, relationships, persuasion, even within yourself. Ask your mind to write 1 sentence, not the whole essay. Read 1 page, not the whole book. Start 1 push-up, not the whole workout. Each tiny favor you grant yourself bypasses resistance and builds momentum toward the larger goal. Because most walls aren't knocked down, they're leaned against gently until they give. The secret isn't asking for everything. It's asking for something. And once momentum begins, a different kind of control becomes possible. Because sometimes it isn't the action that creates power. It's the pause that comes right before it. Pause 1 second before speaking. You're in a conversation. A question lands. You know the answer. Your instinct is to speak immediately, to fill the space, to prove fluency. But instead, you pause. Just 1 second. It's a small silence, barely noticeable, but the air shifts. In that moment, you signal something powerful. You're not rushing. You're not reactive. You're choosing your words. And to the person across from you, that pause feels like confidence. The human mind equates hesitation with uncertainty, unless the pause feels intentional, and a deliberate pause, even brief, suggests mastery. It gives the impression that you're considering, reflecting, controlling the pace of the exchange. The cheat code isn't about slowing everything down. It's about taking back control of time, even when your instinct is to fill it. Quick responses often sound impulsive. Measured ones sound thoughtful. The pause also works on you. It gives your brain a moment to organize, to check the temperature of the room, to soften sharp words before they leave your mouth. Many mistakes aren't made because people don't know the right thing. They're made because they speak too soon. In negotiation, that pause creates pressure. In debate, it signals confidence. In leadership, it shows calm, and in conflict, it can de-escalate tension before it builds. A single second, short enough to keep flow, long enough to suggest depth. Because often, it's not what you say that people hear first. It's how long you waited to say it. And long before you even speak at all, something else is already happening. Something faster than words. Something that locks in before the first sound escapes your lips. First impressions lock fast. The door opens. You step into the room. Eyes meet you. Before a word is spoken, before a handshake, before your first sentence, it's already happening. The impression is forming. We like to believe people judge slowly, carefully, but the mind craves shortcuts. It captures posture, tone, expression, tiny details, and writes a story in seconds, sometimes in less than one. First impressions are sticky. Once the mind assigns a label, confident, awkward, warm, cold, it resists rewriting it. Later behavior gets filtered through that first lens. A stumble seems clumsy if you were seen as nervous. The same stumble feels human if you were seen as poised. That's why small choices early carry such weight. Standing tall, a steady voice, a calm entry. The moment doesn't demand perfection. It demands stability. Control the first few seconds, and you quietly shape the entire interaction that follows. But there's another layer. This works not only with others, but with yourself. The story you tell in your first moments, before a speech, a meeting, a date, anchors your own state. You become the person your body pretends to be. Control the beginning, and much of the rest falls into place. Because after those first few seconds pass, the real dialogue begins. And now a different kind of signal takes over, one that says far more than your words ever will. How long you hold their eyes. Make eye contact last longer. You meet their gaze. For a moment, your eyes lock. And that moment holds more weight than words. But most people look away too soon. They break the connection just as trust begins to form. The human brain reads eye contact as attention, confidence, even honesty. A slightly longer gaze sends a message. I'm present. I'm unafraid. I'm steady. Not aggressive. Not unblinking. Just long enough to feel intentional. This is the cheat code. Let the silence live in your eyes for one beat longer than feels natural. That extra second carries an invisible signal. It suggests control without pressure, warmth without submission, power without threat. The rhythm matters. In conversation, hold eye contact as they speak. As you respond, allow short glances away to release tension, but always return. The balance of connection and ease makes you feel trustworthy, composed, and quietly dominant. But the real trick isn't about controlling them. It's about what eye contact controls inside you. When you hold their gaze, your mind slows, your breathing steadies, your thoughts sharpen. You enter the interaction fully, rather than performing it from a distance. It becomes a signal not just to them, but to yourself. You belong here. And sometimes, that sense of belonging doesn't begin with the eyes. It starts even earlier. Before you enter the room, before anyone turns to greet you. Sometimes it starts with what you choose to wear. Dress 10% sharper than others. You walk into the room. The air shifts before you speak. Not because of words, not because of posture, but because of a quiet calculation every eye makes. They came prepared. Clothing is more than fabric. It's silent framing, a subtle negotiation of status, care, and control. And you don't need to be the best-dressed person in the room. You only need to be dressed slightly sharper than the average. Just enough to signal awareness, just enough to register respect for yourself, for the moment, for the people you're about to meet. The cheat code is 10%. Not overdressed, not casual, elevated. The extra layer, the better fit, the cleaner lines. A version of you that suggests attention to detail without screaming for it. Humans scan appearance before they scan intention. The mind builds early narratives: competence, confidence, authority. And long before you say anything meaningful, your appearance has already begun speaking for you. And once the external aligns with the internal, you unlock the second layer of presence, where words matter less than how you deliver them. But this isn't about fashion. It's about priming perception. It affects how they see you and how you see yourself. Standing slightly elevated shifts your own posture. Your tone follows. Your pace slows. You occupy the room differently because your mind reads your body's signal. You prepared for this. Because sometimes the most powerful influence you carry isn't what you say at all. It's how little you need to say before they listen. And often, that power begins in something far smaller: how you control your tone. Control tone, not volume. You open your mouth to speak. The words are clear. The message is simple. But the real signal arrives beneath them, in the tone that wraps each sentence. Most people chase volume when they want control. They raise their voice to be heard, to command, to push authority outward. But the mind doesn't read volume as confidence. It reads volume as need. Tone, however, whispers something entirely different. The cheat code is not to speak louder. It's to speak calmer, slower, heavier. When your tone drops slightly, when your voice carries steady weight without urgency, you signal a kind of quiet control. You're not chasing attention, you're inviting it, and the invitation feels harder to resist. In tense moments, this becomes a weapon. Arguments cool, conflict stalls. The room adjusts to your rhythm. When others rise in volume, your steady tone creates contrast, and contrast draws the ear. You pull attention toward you by refusing to compete for it. It's the difference between commanding and demanding. But tone does something inside you as well. When you lower your voice intentionally, your breath slows, your heart steadies, your thoughts organize. You remind yourself, I'm in control, even here. You become the calm inside their noise. And once you master that rhythm, once your tone holds steady, you open the door to the next layer of influence. Because often control isn't about what you say, it's about what you give them to hold on to when you say it. Sometimes, all it takes is one word. Because unlocks compliance. You make a request, simple, direct, but sometimes the words alone don't land. Resistance appears. The answer leans toward no, and then you add one small word: because. The shift happens almost instantly. The human brain craves reasons, even when the reason itself carries little weight. The moment you say because, you offer a structure, a justification, a story, and the mind relaxes into it, often without questioning its depth. Psychologists tested this years ago. People trying to cut in line for a copier had far more success when they added any reason, even meaningless ones. The presence of because triggered compliance, not because the reason was valid, but because the structure felt familiar, expected, safe. The cheat code here isn't manipulation, it's rhythm. You're smoothing cognitive friction. You're wrapping the request in something the brain can process easily. A reason, any reason, feels better than none. You can layer this in subtle ways. Could you review this because I value your eye for detail? Let's meet earlier because it'll give us space to think. Please handle this today because the timing matters. The reasons don't need to be profound. They need to be present. But sometimes, reasons alone aren't enough. Because beneath every request lives something far more fragile: what the person is actually feeling. And often, the fastest way to lower their guard is to name the thing they haven't yet said aloud. Name their emotion out loud. You watch them hesitate. Their words stall. Their expression flickers. They're unsure, maybe frustrated, maybe embarrassed. And instead of pressing forward, you speak the thing they haven't yet admitted. This feels frustrating, doesn't it? I can sense this is overwhelming right now. You seem a little uncertain about this part. In that moment, something releases. The mind carries weight when emotions remain unnamed. Unspoken feelings pull focus, tighten defenses, cloud reason. But when you name the emotion calmly, gently, you give permission for the feeling to exist. And more importantly, you take pressure off the person trying to hide it. This isn't about analysis. You're not diagnosing them. You're offering recognition, a simple mirror that says, I see you. And when people feel seen, their resistance softens, their walls lower, their mind opens again to reason, to dialogue, to trust. The cheat code is subtle. You're not solving the emotion, you're acknowledging it. The fear, the frustration, the hesitation, they lose power once spoken aloud. The person is no longer battling the feeling alone. You create safety. Safety creates openness, and openness creates agreement. But even when you need to say no, even when the answer disappoints, this simple act of emotional awareness can carry forward, because rejection doesn't always land hard if it arrives wrapped in warmth. And sometimes, all it takes is the smallest gesture before the word arrives. Smile before saying no. The tension rises before the word arrives. You see it in their posture, their eyes searching for your answer. They're hoping for a yes, but it isn't coming. And so you smile. Not to mock, not to avoid, but to soften what follows. The brain reads the smile before it processes the word. The warmth travels faster than the disappointment. Saying no triggers defensiveness. It carries rejection, finality, sometimes even threat. But when paired with a gentle, genuine smile, the message shifts. The no longer feels like a closed door. It feels like a shared understanding. I won't be able to take that on, but I really appreciate you thinking of me. The words say no, but the expression says we're still connected. And that's often all people need. To feel respected even in refusal. To feel seen even in denial. This cheat code disarms the conflict hiding inside everyday decisions. Negotiations soften. Expectations recalibrate. Relationships stay intact. But there's a second effect too. The smile buys you space. It slows the exchange. It signals confidence, calm, composure. You're not rattled by their request. You're not wrestling with your decision. You're fully at ease inside your no, and that calm becomes contagious. Mastering how you say no is often more powerful than saying yes. But sometimes, even before the request, before the negotiation, you can shift the frame entirely. You don't always need to convince people to want something. Sometimes you just need them to believe they might lose it. Use scarcity to create urgency. You present the offer, the opportunity, the decision, and instead of pushing harder, you pull gently on something much older inside them, scarcity. The human brain is wired to fear loss more than it values gain. When something feels limited, time, availability, access, it suddenly grows in importance. The cost of missing out outweighs the comfort of waiting. You don't need to fabricate pressure. The power lies in framing. There are only a few spots left. This opportunity won't come again for a while. I wanted to bring this to you before it closes. Scarcity creates urgency without force. It allows the person to keep control of the choice while quietly tightening the window of comfort. Delaying becomes riskier. Deciding becomes safer. But scarcity also works because it reshapes focus. When choices feel abundant, the mind delays. When choices feel limited, the mind sharpens. Attention centers. Commitment forms. But there's a second, deeper layer to this. Scarcity primes the mind to compare values quickly. and you can use that momentum to your advantage by controlling what they compare against. The cheat code isn't about creating anxiety, it's about respecting attention. You guide them gently toward decision, before hesitation has time to grow. Before you ask for something small, sometimes you show them something bigger first. Anchor big before asking small. You present your request, but before you do, you show them something heavier, larger, slightly out of reach, and suddenly your real ask feels lighter, easier, almost obvious. This is anchoring. The mind rarely judges value in isolation. It compares. It balances one option against another, often unconsciously. And when the first option feels large, the second feels reasonable, almost like a relief. Normally, this service costs $5,000, but for you it's closer to $1,200. We were originally thinking 10 weeks, but I believe we can do it in 5. Most people in your role manage 8 projects. This would only require 3. The first number, the anchor, sets the scale. The second feels smaller not on its own merit, but because of where the scale began. The cheat code isn't deception. You're not inventing false comparisons. You're guiding the reference point. The mind loves contrast more than it loves accuracy, and contrast creates comfort. Even outside of negotiations, anchoring shapes daily decisions. You tell yourself you'll exercise for 30 minutes, and 15 feels easy. You plan to write 10 pages, and 3 feels achievable. The mind relaxes when it escapes something bigger. But sometimes, even after the anchor, the conversation wobbles, tension creeps in, emotions rise, and in that moment, you don't push harder, you don't match their volume. You do something stranger. You lower yours. Whisper to regain control. The room grows louder. Voices rise. Tension thickens. Everyone fights to fill the space with noise. But instead of joining the surge, you pull back. You lower your voice. Sometimes you nearly whisper, and the room follows. The human brain is drawn to contrast. When others expect volume, quiet becomes magnetic. People instinctively lean in, focusing sharper, chasing every word. You haven't lost authority, you've deepened it. Whispering isn't weakness, it's control. Lowering your voice signals calm when others expect escalation. It suggests certainty when emotions run high. While others struggle for dominance by pushing louder, you reclaim attention by inviting it closer. The cheat code here isn't about volume itself, it's about forcing others to shift their state. You control not just what's heard, but how it's heard. In moments of conflict, this soft power slows the pace. In negotiations, it draws others into your tempo. In conversations, it signals that you are unshaken, fully present, entirely comfortable inside the quiet. And as others slow to meet your rhythm, they begin offering you something even more valuable: space. Because control isn't always taken. Sometimes it's handed to the person who speaks second. Let them speak first. The meeting begins. The negotiation starts. The moment hangs open, waiting for someone to take the lead. Most people rush to fill that silence, to prove readiness, to show strength. But you wait. You let them speak first. The cheat code here is simple. The person who speaks first often reveals more than they intend. Their tone, their priorities, their fears. They expose their framework before you reveal yours. When you let others go first, they show you where the ground is soft and where it's firm. You learn what matters to them, what they're willing to concede, and where their mind is already leaning. In conversation, this pause builds trust. You're not forcing your agenda. You're inviting theirs, and people open up more freely when they feel heard first. It shifts the dynamic from confrontation to collaboration. Psychologically, it does something else. It disarms their defenses. Instead of reacting to you, they start revealing themselves. And once they've spoken, they're often more invested in finding agreement. After all, they've already begun building the path aloud. But once they've opened, once their rhythm appears, another layer begins. how you match their state without them even noticing. Because influence often begins in reflection. Mirror their energy subtly. They speak. You listen. But you're not just hearing their words, you're studying their rhythm, their pace, their tone, the rise and fall of their energy. And quietly, you begin to match it. This is subtle mirroring, not mimicry, not imitation, but gentle alignment. You adjust your speed slightly, soften your gestures to echo theirs, tune your tone to meet their level, and almost invisibly, they feel it. The human brain craves familiarity. When energy levels sync, comfort grows. The interaction feels natural, easy, safe, even when the person can't explain why. The cheat code is precision. Too much mirroring feels artificial. Too little feels distant. But when you find the quiet middle ground, you create resonance. And inside that resonance, trust builds faster than argument ever could. Their mind whispers, "You feel like me." This works in negotiation, in persuasion, in conflict, even in casual conversation. You make the other person feel at home inside your presence. And once their comfort rises, their guard lowers, they reveal more. They share more. And at that point, when they've opened the door, you can gently step inside and guide them somewhere deeper. Because once people begin explaining themselves, they often reveal what even they hadn't fully seen. And sometimes, the simplest way to open that door is just to ask a simple question. Ask, "How did you decide?" The moment feels delicate. You could challenge their choice. You could question their reasoning. But instead, you ask softly, "How did you decide?" The question disarms because it doesn't attack. It invites. Most people defend conclusions, but they're far more open to revisiting the process that led there. This question gently shifts their attention backward, forcing them to retrace their own logic. Often as they explain, gaps appear. Unspoken doubts surface. Their certainty begins to soften, not because you confronted them, but because they're hearing themselves think. The cheat code is subtle. You're not planting doubt, you're allowing them to discover it. The human mind resists being corrected but tolerates being guided towards self-reflection. This works in conflict, in negotiation, in coaching, even inside your own mind. When you ask yourself how you decided, you reopen questions that once felt closed. You spot bias where you once saw clarity. And as people walk backward through their reasoning, you listen, not to correct, but to understand the architecture of their belief. And once that structure is visible, you know exactly where to apply pressure or support. But sometimes, before you even reach that point, before you present your own position, another move opens trust even faster. You reveal your flaws first. Reveal flaws before strengths. You make your case. You offer your idea. But before you present its strengths, you begin with something else, the part that isn't perfect. This may not be right for everyone. There's one limitation I should mention. Here's where this might fall short. In that moment, something unexpected happens. The person across from you relaxes, their guard lowers, their suspicion fades. Why? Because you did what most people avoid. You acknowledged weakness first. The cheat code here is vulnerability used as strength. By admitting a flaw up front, you signal honesty, you take away the objection before it's raised, and in doing so, you build credibility for everything that follows. When people hear only perfection, they search for cracks, but when you show them the crack first, their attention shifts to your confidence in addressing it. You control the frame. This works in selling, negotiating, persuading, but it works just as powerfully in personal moments. Apologies, difficult conversations, trust building, flaws create relatability. Strengths feel more solid when they're not hiding weaknesses behind them. But even as you guide others through these subtle shifts, another tool quietly amplifies your influence. One you must use carefully, precisely, and rarely. Use their name sparingly. You speak to them. Their attention wavers, their mind drifts, and then you say it quietly, Naturally, their name. Suddenly they're back. The human brain lights up when it hears its own name. It's a built-in reflex, wired from childhood, deeply personal. No sound travels faster through someone's attention filter than the one tied directly to their identity. But the cheat code isn't simply using names. It's knowing when not to. Say a name too often, and it feels scripted, manipulative. The brain detects the pattern and resists it. But use it sparingly at key moments, and it lands like a weight. A subtle nudge that says, "This is for you." Early in conversation, a name establishes warmth. Midway, it refocuses drifting attention. At the end, it leaves a personal imprint on the exchange. That's a good point, Sarah. Let's revisit that part later, James. I appreciate you sharing that, Emily. Each small insertion strengthens the bond without shouting for it. But even beyond names, the principle holds. The words someone just spoke are the ones most tied to their focus. And sometimes, reflecting those exact words back creates an almost invisible pull, one that keeps them leaning in. Repeat their last 3 words. They speak. You listen. And just as their sentence lands, you quietly repeat the last few words they offered. It's just been overwhelming lately. Overwhelming lately? It feels like nothing, but something shifts. The human mind craves recognition. When you echo someone's final words, just 2 or 3, they feel heard, validated, encouraged to continue. It signals attention without interruption, curiosity without challenge. The cheat code here isn't mimicry, it's momentum. You allow their thoughts to deepen, their emotions to surface, their explanations to expand. People often reveal more after hearing their own words return gently to them. It's a tricky decision. A tricky decision? Yeah, because if I choose wrong, it affects everything. That next layer, the one they wouldn't have offered unprompted, arrives because of your quiet reflection. This works in conflict, in coaching, in negotiation. It removes pressure. It invites depth. It gives you more information without asking heavy questions. But as the conversation unfolds, you'll often arrive at a moment where you need to make a request to move things forward. And when that time comes, the frame you choose is everything. Because people resist requests that feel one-sided, but they lean into ones that serve both of you. Frame every request as win-win. You need something, their time, their agreement, their help. But instead of presenting it as your need, you shift the frame subtly, powerfully, so they see how it benefits both of you. If we approach it this way, it moves us both forward. This solution frees up your team while keeping us on track. Working together here gets us both where we want to be. The mind naturally resists one-sided asks. People guard their energy, their resources, their attention. But when a request feels mutual, when they see their own win inside your ask, the resistance softens. You're not taking, you're building something together. The cheat code isn't persuasion through pressure, it's alignment. You're shifting their focus from why help you to why help themselves by helping you. In negotiation, this creates openings. In leadership, it inspires action. In relationships, it deepens trust, because people rarely resent contributing to outcomes they believe serve them too. And beneath it all, something deeper happens. They begin associating your success with their own. Your wins feel like shared wins, and that bond becomes hard to break. But this quiet alignment doesn't only happen during requests. You can plant it even when the person isn't in the room, by speaking about others in ways that ripple back unexpectedly. Compliment absent people. The room is quiet. You speak of someone who isn't here, and instead of gossip, criticism, or empty flattery, you offer something simple, something kind. She's one of the most reliable people I've worked with. He handled that situation with real care. The person listening takes note. Even if the compliment isn't about them, something shifts in how they see you. When you speak well of others behind closed doors, you signal integrity. You reveal a pattern. This is how I speak when people aren't watching. and the listener, almost instinctively, imagines how you might speak about them when they aren't around. The cheat code here is trust building by proxy. You don't need to convince people of your character directly. You let them witness it in how you carry others. Complimenting absent people plants seeds that quietly grow. Word travels, reputation builds, and when your name comes up in rooms you've never entered, the echoes you've left behind are often what people remember most. But even inside conversations, when the person sits across from you, you can build similar momentum even without words. Sometimes it's the smallest physical signal that nudges them forward. A simple nod. Nod while asking questions. You lean forward slightly. You ask your question, and as you do, you nod. Slow, subtle, controlled. The words invite an answer. The nod invites agreement. The brain responds to non-verbal cues far faster than it processes language. When you nod while asking, you plant a quiet suggestion. The answer is likely yes. It doesn't guarantee agreement, but it tilts the scale. It signals openness, safety, and a rhythm that encourages alignment. Do you see where this helps us both? Would you agree that this option feels more flexible? The cheat code here isn't manipulation, it's guidance. You're not forcing compliance. You're lowering friction. You create a smooth path for the answer to follow. Even outside persuasion, nodding during conversation triggers openness. The other person feels heard, encouraged to elaborate, pulled into your tempo. But agreement doesn't mean you always avoid conflict. Disagreement will come. And when it does, how you step into it shapes everything. The key is not to push first, but to validate. Validate before disagreeing. You feel the disagreement rise. Their idea clashes with yours. The easy impulse is to correct, to push back, to dismantle. But instead, you pause. You acknowledge. That's a good point. I see where you're coming from. You're right about that part. Before offering your view, you validate theirs. The human mind shields itself when attacked. The moment people sense opposition, defenses rise, even before they process your words. But when you begin by recognizing something true in what they've said, their guard softens. They feel respected, not dismissed. The cheat code isn't about surrender. You're not conceding the debate. You're opening space for your perspective to enter without triggering resistance. Validation clears the emotional fog. It keeps the conversation on logic rather than ego. And often, after feeling heard, people become more willing to hear you in return. That's a valid concern. And here's another piece we should consider. You've raised something important. Let's build on that together. The disagreement stays collaborative. Solutions stay within reach. And beneath this process lies a deeper principle. Before you ask anyone to move toward your position, remind them you're already standing on some shared ground. Start with shared goals. The conversation begins. Tension quietly lingers. Different ideas, different positions, different stakes. But instead of launching into your argument, you take a moment to aim wider. We both want this to work long term. Our goal here is the same, to find the best path forward. At the end of the day, we're both trying to protect what matters. You shift the frame. Before debating details, you remind both sides of what you already share. The higher ground, the mutual outcome, the place where your interests overlap. The cheat code here is alignment before persuasion. When people feel their goals are seen and respected, their openness grows. Conflict shifts from me versus you to us versus the problem. The mind relaxes when it feels safe inside shared purpose. Resistance lowers, collaboration rises, and even when you eventually disagree, that disagreement feels like fine-tuning, not opposition. In negotiations, this builds faster deals. In leadership, it creates loyalty. In relationships, it holds trust during difficult conversations. You're not forcing agreement. You're inviting partnership. But once shared ground is clear, logic alone often isn't enough. Because what people follow most easily isn't explanation, it's story. Use story, not explanation. You present your idea. You could explain the facts, the steps, the reasoning, but instead, you tell a story. I worked with a client facing the same problem. A few years ago, I saw this exact situation play out. Let me walk you through what happened last time we tried it. The human brain doesn't naturally absorb logic. It absorbs narrative. Stories offer sequence, tension, resolution. They give emotion to information, movement to facts, shape to abstract ideas. The cheat code isn't just about entertainment. It's about structure. A story allows your listener to see themselves inside the situation. They're not simply hearing what's true. They're experiencing what could happen. Stories disarm skepticism. They bypass defenses. They create understanding without feeling like persuasion, and often long after the details fade, the emotional arc of the story remains. Even in data-driven situations, a well-placed story makes the argument feel real. This has happened before. This is how it played out. This is how it could play out again. But sometimes, even with a good story, hesitation lingers. They wait. They stall. They tell themselves there's still time. And that's when you quietly change the frame, by limiting how long the door stays open. Offer limited time options. You present the opportunity, the offer, the decision point. But instead of leaving it wide open, you narrow the window carefully, calmly. This window won't stay open long. We're only holding a few spots. After this week, it moves forward without changes. The mind reacts differently when time is limited. Without boundaries, decisions drift, choices get postponed. But when options feel finite, hesitation sharpens into action. The cheat code here isn't pressure. It's focus. You're helping the mind step out of endless deliberation and into choice. Deadlines force clarity. Scarcity speeds commitment. People act faster, not because they're forced, but because the cost of delay feels real. Limited time options work because they reduce psychological drag. They frame the moment as valuable. And the person isn't just choosing between yes or no, they're choosing between now or never. But even before the offer, you can create a different kind of urgency. Not with time, not with scarcity, but with curiosity. Sometimes, all it takes is a simple phrase. Say, few know this trick. You lean in slightly, lower your voice, and offer it like a secret. Few people know this trick. Most never learn this part. Hardly anyone uses this, but it works. The words instantly trigger curiosity. The listener leans forward, not because of the content yet, but because of the frame. You've planted the idea that what follows is rare, special, maybe even exclusive. The cheat code here is psychological scarcity, not of time or availability, but of knowledge. People crave access to what others don't know. The promise of hidden insight lights up attention far faster than ordinary facts. The mind instinctively believes, if few people know this, I'm lucky to hear it, I'm ahead of others now. This creates ownership before the information even arrives. The person becomes invested, not just in the tip itself, but in the act of receiving it. But even as you deliver these quiet signals through words, your body continues speaking beneath every sentence. And if you know how to reflect their posture, their movement, their rhythm, you create a connection far deeper than words alone can build. Because bodies recognize themselves inside one another. Echo their body language. They lean forward. You lean forward. They relax their shoulders. You loosen yours. They cross their legs. A few seconds later, you shift similarly. They may not notice, but their mind does. The human brain is wired to seek familiarity. When someone's body language reflects our own, we unconsciously feel more understood, more comfortable, more aligned. The tension drops. The distance shrinks. The cheat code isn't mimicry. It's gentle calibration. Obvious copying feels strange, even unsettling. but subtle echoes, spaced naturally, build an invisible bridge between you. Negotiators use it to create trust. Therapists use it to build rapport. Leaders use it to calm tense rooms. And ordinary people use it without even knowing, falling into synchronized rhythms with friends, partners, and allies. The magic lies in tempo. You don't mirror immediately. You absorb, pause, and reflect. The pacing makes it feel organic. The person feels seen without understanding why. And once that comfort grows, you gain permission to guide the rhythm, to slow it, to shift it, to introduce pauses they'll follow without question. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can add to a conversation is nothing at all. Let silence build pressure. Silence stretches. The longer it lives, the heavier it feels for them. The words stop. The room holds its breath. You don't rush to fill it. You wait. Most people fear empty space in conversation. They scramble to fill it, to relieve the growing tension. But controlled silence isn't absence. It's pressure. It shifts the weight of the moment onto the other person, inviting them to speak first, to reveal more, to soften their stance. The cheat code here is restraint. You don't need to push. You create the vacuum and let them step into it. In negotiations, silence after a proposal often leads to better terms. In conflict, it forces reflection instead of escalation. In persuasion, it nudges them to fill the space with their own agreement. Silence feels uncomfortable because it demands internal movement. People search for stability, and in doing so, they often drift toward your position simply to resolve the tension. But once silence has done its work, once the pressure has softened their defenses, you offer them something lighter. An invitation to share without force, without cornering. You simply ask, "What's your perspective?" Ask for their perspective. You could state your case. You could argue, explain, convince, but instead you open the door wider. What's your perspective? It's not a trick. It's permission. The mind lowers its defenses when invited to contribute. This question signals respect, not challenge. It allows them to speak, to feel ownership over the conversation, to move from reacting to collaborating. The cheat code here is control through invitation. When people speak their perspective aloud, two things happen. First, you gain valuable insight into their priorities, concerns, and unspoken resistance. Second, they become more invested in the outcome because they've helped shape it. This works in difficult conversations, in negotiations, in leadership, even in conflict resolution. When you ask for their perspective, you're not surrendering your position. You're drawing them closer to it. You make them feel heard, and people who feel heard are far more open to hearing you in return. But once their perspective is shared, you gain an opportunity to strengthen the bond even further by recognizing their wins and making them visible. Restate their wins publicly. The meeting ends. The deal closes. The conversation wraps. And before you move on, you do something most people forget. You shine a light on their wins. You really handled that piece well. Your input made all the difference here. The way you approached this was exactly what we needed. Not privately, publicly. The cheat code here is reinforcement. You're anchoring their success, not just in their mind, but in front of others. It strengthens their confidence, deepens their commitment, and makes them far more likely to engage positively in future conversations. When people feel their contributions are seen and valued, especially in front of others, they naturally want to protect and repeat that success. You're not just complimenting, you're building identity. And identity is sticky. Once someone sees themselves as capable, helpful, or valuable, they fight to stay consistent with that image. You create a loop where their success feeds future cooperation. But even as confidence grows, doubt still lurks. Hesitations appear. Fear whispers, "What if this doesn't work?" And that's when you quietly slip in one of the most powerful phrases in persuasion. Use "even if" to kill doubt. The hesitation lingers. They like the idea. They see the benefit. But somewhere beneath their words is quiet uncertainty. What if it goes wrong? What if something happens? You don't dismiss their fear. You don't argue with it. Instead, you neutralize it before it grows. Even if this takes longer, we still come out ahead. Even if the first version isn't perfect, we'll adjust quickly. Even if we hit obstacles, we've already built in safeguards. The cheat code here is expectation management. You're acknowledging the risk while shrinking its power. You remove the hidden objection without forcing them to confess it. The brain relaxes when it sees a path forward that accounts for failure. You're giving them permission to commit, not because success is guaranteed, but because failure is survivable. Even if reframes risk into reassurance, it doesn't deny uncertainty. It contains it. This is one of the quiet levers of trust. People don't need certainty to move forward. They need safety inside uncertainty. And even while your words carry that safety, your body can carry it too, in ways the mind registers long before it processes a single sentence. Keep hands above waist. You're speaking. They're watching. And even if they don't consciously notice, their mind reads every signal your body sends. Your words carry one message, your hands carry another. Keep them above the waist. The cheat code is rooted in ancient instincts. Open hands, visible and elevated, signal honesty, calm, and control. Hidden hands, stuffed in pockets, folded tightly, hanging low, trigger mild discomfort. The mind wonders, what are they hiding? Why are they retreating? When your hands move naturally between your waist and shoulders, you radiate openness, authority without threat, warmth without submission. You're not defending, you're inviting. This positioning also grounds your gestures. Movements feel purposeful rather than chaotic. The person listening senses structure beneath your words, even when they can't explain why. In tense conversations, raised hands calm the room. In presentations, they hold attention. In negotiation, they suggest confidence even before you speak your strongest point. But your hands are only one part of the silent language your face carries. Because sometimes even the smallest shift in your expression, a lowering of your eyebrows, can quietly shift the entire balance of authority. Lower eyebrows to gain authority. You lock eyes. You're calm, steady, and without force, you allow your eyebrows to lower just slightly. The atmosphere changes. Lowered eyebrows signal something primal: focus, seriousness, control. They tell the person across from you that you're not threatened, not uncertain, not seeking approval. You're centered in your position, quietly grounded. The cheat code here isn't aggression, it's quiet gravity. Raised eyebrows invite, soften, encourage. Lowered eyebrows steady, anchor, lead. You signal that you're holding the space, not chasing it. In negotiations, this creates silent pressure. In leadership, it earns instant respect. In difficult conversations, it helps diffuse emotional volatility because your stillness invites them to mirror your calm. This tiny movement shapes how your entire face is read. Confidence flows through your eyes before it ever arrives in your voice. But even beyond facial expression, your physical position shapes power long before words begin. And sometimes, the most effective posture starts not face to face, but slightly turned. Sit at 45-degree angle in meetings. The chairs are arranged. The table is set. Most people sit directly across from each other, head on, locked into invisible battle lines. You don't. You turn slightly, just 45 degrees. The cheat code is spatial framing. Full frontal positions feel confrontational. They place you directly in the path of judgment, triggering subconscious defensiveness. But a slight angle softens the space. It creates collaboration instead of confrontation. You're beside them, not against them. The mind reads the shift. We're facing this problem together. Negotiators use this to diffuse tension. Therapists use it to encourage openness. Leaders use it to create calm authority. At 45 degrees, Eye contact remains natural, but optional. Gestures feel fluid, not sharp. The entire conversation breathes easier, and inside that comfort, people speak more freely, listen more closely, trust more deeply. Position controls energy long before words enter, and once the body signals calm, your voice must match it, because the words you choose matter less than the speed at which you deliver them. Slow your speech slightly. The words are ready. The idea is clear. But you resist the pull to rush. Instead, you slow, just enough. The cheat code isn't speaking slowly for the sake of slowness. It's speaking slightly slower than the person expects. The mind assigns meaning to pace. Fast speech can feel nervous, anxious, eager to convince. Slower speech, controlled, deliberate, signals confidence, authority, certainty. When you slow your delivery, you create space around your words. The pauses invite attention. The listener leans in, tracking each thought with more care. Your words feel heavier, more considered. In negotiation, this calm pace unnerves those expecting pressure. In leadership, it signals mastery. In conflict, it cools the room. The key is subtlety. You're not dragging your words. You're allowing each one to land fully before the next arrives. The message, I'm in no hurry because I'm in control. And once your pace invites their attention, you can open the door even wider, with one simple phrase that disarms resistance before it begins. Start with, I'm curious. The question waits. The disagreement sits between you. You could challenge directly, but instead, you soften the approach. I'm curious. Two words that shift the entire dynamic. The cheat code here is lowering resistance before it rises. Curiosity frames your question as exploration, not confrontation. It signals openness rather than judgment. The person across from you feels invited, not attacked. I'm curious how you landed on that. I'm curious what made you choose that approach. I'm curious what you see as the next step. Curiosity disarms defensiveness. The brain doesn't brace when it feels safe to explain. The person shifts from defending to sharing, from resisting to revealing. You still gain the information you need. You still challenge gently when required, but you do it from a place that keeps dialogue open. And while your words guide the conversation, your body keeps sending signals beneath the surface, right down to where your feet are quietly aimed. Point your feet toward leader. The room is full, discussions circle, decisions unfold. And while voices carry the conversation, your body quietly signals where your attention sits. Watch the feet. The cheat code is in orientation. Our feet point where our interest flows. When you subtly angle your feet toward the leader, the person with influence, you non-verbally show alignment, attentiveness, respect. The leader notices, even if they can't explain why. So do others. It signals presence without trying to dominate. You're part of the gravity holding the room together. But you can also read others this way. Who do their feet follow? Where does the silent loyalty flow? In tense meetings, feet often reveal shifting alliances before words catch up. This isn't about manipulation. It's awareness. Subtle alignment builds trust, comfort, access. And once you're positioned inside that current of trust, you unlock something even more valuable. The ability to elevate others while strengthening your own authority. Because influence grows fastest when you quietly shift credit to those around you. Shift credit to the team. The project succeeds. The room applauds. The moment could easily become yours, but you do something different. The team made this possible. Their work carried us here. I was lucky to stand alongside them. The cheat code is simple but rare. Give credit away. When you elevate others, you build something far stronger than personal praise. You build loyalty. People trust leaders who shine light on the group, not just themselves. And paradoxically, the more credit you give, the more authority you quietly gather. The mind reads generosity as confidence. It signals that you don't need to hoard attention because your value is already secure. You become the person people want to work with, not out of obligation, but because they feel seen, valued, trusted. In meetings, in partnerships. The more you lift others, the more they lift you. But even with that goodwill in place, difficult moments still arrive. Mistakes surface, corrections are needed. And when they do, there's a way to soften impact by allowing humor to land first. Use humor before criticism. The error sits on the table. Obvious. Heavy. Everyone feels it, but no one wants to touch it first. The air stiffens. You can feel defenses rising before words are even spoken. You could correct them now. Direct, sharp, clean. But instead, you offer a small doorway. Well, I think we've just invented one more way not to do it. Luckily, mistakes like this don't charge rent. Consider this version our warm-up attempt. And the room exhales. The cheat code here is not avoidance, it's disarming. Humor lowers the shield that naturally rises in moments of failure. The brain hears the criticism without the sting because the laughter has already softened the landing. We fear being wrong far more than we fear being corrected. That fear tightens the mind, closes the ears, clouds clear thinking, but humor sidesteps the ego entirely. It creates distance between the person and the mistake, allowing them to see the problem without feeling like they are the problem. You're not dismissing the error. You're giving permission to face it, to fix it, to learn. And beneath the laughter, something deeper happens. The person remains engaged. They're still in the conversation, still willing to adjust, still open to your guidance. This works because trust isn't built in moments of agreement. It's built in how you navigate error together. And once their guard has lowered, you have a rare opportunity to guide them toward your solution without ever forcing it, by making them feel like the answer was already theirs. Frame it as their idea. The conversation moves forward. You have a solution in mind, a direction you want them to follow. But instead of presenting it outright, you guide them gently toward discovering it themselves. Given everything you've said, what would you suggest? How do you think we might approach that? If you were advising someone else, where would you start? The cheat code here is ownership. People defend their own ideas far more fiercely than they accept someone else's. When a solution feels like their own, commitment rises naturally. Resistance fades. Doubt softens. You're not withholding your input. You're shaping the pathway toward it. You drop hints. You narrow options. You highlight key factors. Slowly, they assemble the pieces you've placed in front of them. And when they finally arrive at the answer, sometimes almost word for word as you imagined, it feels organic, effortless. The mind quietly says, I figured this out. And with that sense of authorship comes deeper engagement, stronger buy-in, and lasting alignment. This approach works in negotiations, leadership, partnerships, even personal conflict. It's not manipulation. It's permission. You're allowing them to remain the hero of their own narrative while gently steering the arc. And to uncover them, sometimes all you need to ask is unspoken hesitations, quiet fears. But even after the idea lands, hidden resistance may still linger beneath agreement. What worries you most? Ask what worries you most. The surface looks calm. They've nodded, agreed, smiled. But you know better. Beneath polite acceptance often hides something heavier. Hesitation, uncertainty, quiet fear. You don't force them to reveal it. You invite. What worries you most? The cheat code is simple but powerful. By giving fear permission to surface, you prevent it from growing silently. Unspoken doubts don't disappear. They deepen, but once voiced, they shrink. This question signals safety. You're not challenging their position. You're acknowledging that risk is part of every decision. That fear doesn't make them weak. It makes them human. And once they share, you gain a map, what truly matters to them, where the pressure points live, what obstacles must be cleared to move forward. Often their greatest worry isn't the decision itself, but the unknown after it. When you help them speak those fears aloud, you begin dismantling resistance before it hardens. That makes sense. Let's walk through that piece together. Here's how we've handled similar concerns before. They no longer feel cornered. They feel partnered. And long before these conversations unfold, you can shape much of this dynamic before the first words are even exchanged, by choosing carefully where you sit. Control seating position early. The meeting hasn't started yet, but the game is already in motion. You walk into the room. The seats are open. Most people gravitate toward habit, center, end, across. You pause. You choose. The cheat code here is placement before conversation. Where you sit shapes everything that follows. At a round table, sitting slightly to the leader's right signals alignment without subservience. At a rectangular table, choosing a seat that allows easy eye contact without full confrontation builds subtle influence. You position yourself where you can see the key players clearly, where your presence can be felt without dominating, where your gestures are visible but not aggressive. The mind reads these silent cues long before words arrive. It senses cooperation or challenge, openness or distance, comfort or caution. In high-stakes meetings, this positioning controls flow. You're close enough to guide the conversation, but distant enough to avoid feeling forceful. It's a physical signal. I'm present, attentive, and calmly in the room's rhythm. And long before decisions are made, you've already shaped how your presence will be received. But even with the perfect seat, and even with trust building in your favor, doubt can still emerge. Not because you failed, but because you didn't address the objection waiting quietly inside their mind. And that's why you don't wait for objections. You predict them before they even arrive. Predict objections before they appear. You present your idea. You outline the plan. And as you speak, you know the hesitation forming silently on the other side of the table. You address it before they voice it. Now you might be thinking this timeline feels aggressive. One concern could be whether the budget holds. Some people hesitate here, worrying about stability. The cheat code here is anticipation. You're not avoiding objections, you're bringing them forward first, and by doing so, you strip them of surprise. You prevent them from hardening into opposition. When you name the objection, you control its framing. You show awareness. You demonstrate preparation. And most importantly, you signal respect for their concerns before they have to defend them. The mind relaxes when it feels seen. The unspoken fear dissolves when someone else says it first. And often, once you've acknowledged the objection, the person feels far less need to push it. It's a fair question. That's why we've built in these safeguards. That risk exists, and here's how we've accounted for it. Anticipation is one of the most disarming forms of persuasion, because people trust those who see the problem before being told. And yet, beneath all these techniques, influence rests on something even simpler: the willingness to go first. To be human before being persuasive. Open with a vulnerability. The conversation begins. The stakes feel high. You could posture. You could present strength, polish, perfection. But instead, you reveal something unexpected. This part has challenged me too. When I first faced this, I didn't get it right. I've made mistakes figuring this out. The cheat code is quiet disarmament. Vulnerability softens the space between you. It signals humility without weakness. It tells the other person, we are both human here. When you admit imperfection first, you lower defenses. You make space for honesty. You model the openness you hope to receive. The other person feels safe enough to engage without fear of judgment. In negotiations, vulnerability makes you relatable. In leadership, it creates loyalty. In personal conflict, it repairs fractures that logic alone cannot reach. But the key is balance. Vulnerability isn't confession. You're not surrendering authority. You're creating shared ground. And inside that ground, trust grows far faster than it does under pressure. Once trust blooms, influence becomes far easier. Because instead of forcing decisions, you now gently guide them. by offering choices instead of commands. Offer choices, not orders. You approach the decision point. The conversation leans forward, waiting for direction. You could issue the plan, set the rule, deliver the instruction. But instead, you shift the frame. Would you prefer to start Monday or Wednesday? We can move forward now or explore a few more options together. Does it make more sense to handle this personally or delegate it? The cheat code here is gentle control through choice. The human mind resists feeling boxed in. Commands trigger instinctive pushback, but when offered options, even narrow ones, people feel ownership. They're not being directed. They're deciding. This isn't about manipulating outcomes. You're guiding toward the same destination while preserving dignity. The person stays engaged because the choice remains theirs. The question shifts from if to how. Psychologically, choice taps into autonomy, one of the brain's deepest needs. Even small freedoms, selecting the timing, the method, the starting point, help people feel empowered rather than managed. Leaders use this to inspire action. Negotiators use it to close deals. Parents use it with children. The moment someone feels ownership over a choice, their commitment rises, their resistance fades, their sense of control strengthens, even when both options serve your larger goal. Because when people choose their path, they walk it more willingly. And sometimes, to deepen that influence further, you must do something that jolts them slightly, breaking the rhythm they expect. Break patterns unexpectedly. The conversation flows. Predictable. Familiar. Each sentence follows the next like well-worn steps on a path. Neither of you question, but influence rarely lives in routine. Sometimes, the shift you need comes from breaking that rhythm, quietly, intentionally. You pause where they expect you to respond. You ask a question that doesn't follow their train of thought. You offer an unexpected angle they hadn't considered. Let's look at it from the opposite side for a moment. What if we've been asking the wrong question entirely? Imagine if this problem never existed. What would change? The cheat code here isn't shock. It's subtle disruption. You aren't attacking. You're waking up attention. The human brain filters repetition and tunes out expected patterns. But when something unexpected appears, attention sharpens. Curiosity activates. The conversation becomes new again. In negotiations, pattern breaks create openings. In conflict, they diffuse rising tension. In leadership, they pull teams out of stale thinking. You're offering the mind a new pathway, one it didn't expect to walk. And once attention re-engages, you have an opening to guide them forward. But even with their focus sharpened, disagreement still requires care, because one careless word can slam the door shut again. Often that word is so small, it feels harmless. Avoid but in arguments. The disagreement begins. They share their view. You listen. You have a different perspective, one you're ready to present, and then you make the mistake most people make. I see your point, but the moment that word arrives, everything before it evaporates. The brain hears the but and translates it into dismissal. Everything you just said doesn't matter. The cheat code here is removing friction from disagreement. It's not about avoiding conflict. It's about keeping dialogue open, but slams doors. It signals opposition before your point even arrives. Instead, you shift. I see your point, and here's another way we might approach it. That's a strong observation. At the same time, we should also consider, you're raising something important. There's also this piece we might add. The word "and" holds space for both perspectives. It feels additive rather than corrective. The person doesn't feel invalidated. They feel expanded. The tension softens. The conversation remains cooperative, even inside disagreement. This works because the brain protects its sense of self. When you use but, you trigger defense. When you use and, you invite participation. You're not forcing surrender. You're keeping them engaged while gently guiding them forward. And once you've kept the doors open, you can pull them even further toward your vision. by painting not where things are, but where they could be. Because the mind is far more willing to move when you invite it into the future. Use future pacing. You present your idea. The facts are clear. The logic is sound. But logic rarely moves people. What moves them is possibility. The vision of a future they can step into. Imagine if this process ran twice as fast. Imagine how the team would feel with that burden lifted. Imagine what happens if we get this right now. The cheat code here is future pacing, inviting the mind to visit a world where the decision has already been made and the benefits are already unfolding. You're not arguing anymore, you're transporting. The brain responds differently to imagined futures. Once people picture themselves inside a better outcome, they begin emotionally committing to it. They feel ownership over a world that doesn't exist yet, but now could. This technique lowers resistance because it bypasses analysis. Instead of defending their current position, they begin emotionally experiencing your proposal's outcome. Future pacing also creates momentum. It makes the cost of inaction feel heavier. The longer they remain in indecision, the further they are from this better reality you've helped them envision. But you're not just pulling them forward, you're allowing them to walk there voluntarily. You're guiding, not pushing. And sometimes, to deepen that ownership even more, you reverse the roles entirely. Instead of teaching them, you invite them to teach you. Ask them to teach you. You sit across from them. They hold knowledge, experience, or even just a perspective you want access to. You could press, you could challenge, but instead, you hand them the authority. Help me understand how you approach this. Can you walk me through how you see it? What would you teach someone facing this? The cheat code is simple: reversal of roles. By asking them to teach you, you do three things at once. First, you elevate their status. People feel respected when their expertise is acknowledged, even if that expertise is informal. Second, you disarm defensiveness. When someone teaches, they stop guarding. They start explaining. And third, you gain insight, often more than you would through direct questioning. The act of teaching forces clarity. As they walk you through their process, gaps emerge they may not have seen before. They refine their thinking in real time, often shifting closer to your position without any pressure from you. This technique works in negotiations, coaching, leadership, even conflict. You're not surrendering control, you're inviting collaboration. The person becomes emotionally invested because they're contributing, not just complying. And underneath it all, something deeper happens. People rarely argue with conclusions they've helped build. By giving them the space to explain, you allow them to gently adjust their own beliefs without feeling forced. Touch objects to anchor attention. The conversation flows. Voices shift. Ideas bounce around the table. Attention drifts easily, but then your hand moves, not wildly, not dramatically, just intentionally. You touch the object in front of you. A pen, a folder, a glass. And suddenly the room recalibrates. The cheat code here is anchoring through physical presence. Our minds naturally follow movement, especially subtle movement tied to purposeful speech. When you touch an object while making a point, you ground both the visual and the verbal together. The idea feels more real, more stable, more certain. Here's where we landed. Your hand rests gently on the document. This is the part that concerns me. Your finger traces the specific paragraph. The decision lives right here. Your hand lightly taps the table. The object becomes a physical reference point. The conversation now orbits something concrete, not floating in abstraction. You control focus without raising your voice or dominating the discussion. The attention follows your hand because your hand follows intention. This works in negotiations, team meetings, even casual conversations. It makes your message feel deliberate, steady, unshaken, and unlike dramatic gestures, it doesn't trigger defensiveness. It invites stillness. There's also a second layer. Your own mind responds too. When your hand lands calmly, your breathing slows, your pacing steadies. You enter full control of your delivery. The movement signals to both sides. We're grounded. We're here. This matters. But as attention centers, there's an even quieter form of control you can wield. One that requires no movement at all. One that happens when you choose to hold your words and speak last. Speak last in group discussions. The room fills with voices. Opinions fly early. Arguments sharpen. Ideas collide. Most people race to speak first, eager to impress, eager to own the direction. You don't. You listen. You study not only what's said, but how it's said. The words, the tone, the alliances forming quietly beneath the surface. You collect data others miss because they're too busy trying to be heard. The cheat code here is patience. Speaking last allows you to absorb every argument, every hesitation, every unspoken concern. By the time your voice enters, you hold the full map. You're not reacting. You're concluding. When you speak last, your words carry more weight, not because they're louder, but because they arrive fully informed. The group senses you've listened. You aren't rushing to compete for airtime. You're stepping in when the fog has already started to clear. I've heard some strong points today. Building on what's been said, after hearing everyone's input, here's where I land. People respect restraint. It signals confidence, not hesitation. You don't need to dominate the room because your timing shows you're controlling the moment itself. And there's another layer. When you speak last, others feel seen. They're more willing to support your conclusion because you've allowed them to contribute first. Their voices feel included. Their perspectives feel honored. You've guided the group without ever appearing to push. And when people feel heard, they're far more open to aligning with your direction. But even as you guide decisions, there's a way to strengthen their commitment even further by recognizing not just what they achieve, but how they strive. Compliment effort, not outcome. The results arrive. The project finishes. The numbers land. And while everyone watches the outcome, you direct your praise somewhere quieter. I saw how much preparation went into this. The way you stayed steady during setbacks really mattered. Your consistency through each step made the difference. The cheat code here is simple but powerful. Praise the process, not just the product. When people hear praise for outcomes, they feel temporarily satisfied. But when you recognize the effort, the focus, the resilience, the discipline, you reinforce something far deeper: identity. The mind attaches to the behaviors that were noticed. Praise outcome, and people wait for external validation. Praise effort, and people begin to see themselves as capable, persistent, adaptive. They internalize these traits. And because those traits feel controllable, motivation strengthens. In teams, this creates cultures of resilience. In leadership, it fosters growth. In personal relationships, it builds confidence that isn't fragile. You didn't just get it right, you worked it through. The way you approach the problem made success possible. The person becomes anchored in the belief, I know how to handle challenges. I can repeat this. And repetition is where true excellence lives. But even as people take ownership of their work, another subtle tool appears, allowing them to correct you, especially on the small things. Because letting someone gently adjust you doesn't weaken authority. It deepens connection. Let them correct small errors. You speak, you explain, and sometimes, intentionally or not, you leave a small detail slightly off, a date, a number, a minor fact, and they catch it. Actually, I think it was last quarter, not this one. Wasn't it closer to 12%, not 15%? You pause. You nod. You accept the correction easily. You're right. Thanks for clarifying. The cheat code here is subtle. Allow them the space to correct you on harmless details. It builds their sense of competence without threatening your authority. Their mind feels sharper, their voice feels heard, and paradoxically, your credibility grows stronger because you demonstrate comfort with being wrong on small things. When people feel safe correcting minor errors, they're less likely to challenge your major points aggressively. They don't need to resist you because you've shown you're open, collaborative, secure. The power here isn't in being perfect, it's in being unthreatened. In negotiations, this tactic relaxes tension. In coaching, it encourages openness. In leadership, it builds psychological safety where truth flows freely. You're not inviting chaos. You're offering controlled space where they experience tiny wins, which reinforces trust and partnership. Their mind whispers, he listens, she adjusts. This feels fair. And once that environment is built, you gain something even more valuable. Room to pause when the difficult questions arrive. Because in those moments when the stakes rise, your silence becomes your greatest control. Pause before you answer tough cues. The question lands, hard, complex. The room turns toward you, waiting for your response. Most people rush to fill that space, to avoid appearing uncertain, to prove they're ready. But you don't. You let the silence hold. One breath, two, maybe even three. The cheat code here is controlled pause. It's not hesitation, it's presence. When you pause after a difficult question, you signal calm authority. You show that you're thinking, not reacting, that you're weighing the moment rather than scrambling to defend. The human brain often equates speed with anxiety. When someone answers too quickly, it can feel rehearsed, defensive, shallow. But when you allow yourself a beat before speaking, it sends a different message. I'm steady, I'm considering, I have nothing to prove. In negotiations, this pause unsettles the other side just enough to shift momentum. In leadership, it earns respect because people see your response as thoughtful, not impulsive. In conflict, it slows escalation by cooling emotion. The pause also buys you clarity. Your breathing slows. Your mind catches up with your mouth. And often, the best version of your answer emerges in those few quiet seconds you allowed yourself. That's a fair question. Here's how I'm thinking about it right now. You don't rush toward the answer. You walk into it, bringing them with you. And once you've modeled that calm approach, you invite others into the same space, not by demanding certainty, but by shifting how you frame their participation. Instead of seeking perfect answers, you start asking for opinions. Ask for opinions, not answers. The discussion moves forward. You need input. Most people ask directly for answers. What should we do? What's the solution? What's your recommendation? But answers carry weight. Answers feel final. People hesitate when they sense the pressure to be right. Fear of being wrong holds back contribution. So instead, you lower the barrier. What's your opinion? How does this feel to you? What's your first instinct here? The cheat code here is gentle engagement. When you ask for opinions, you invite participation without judgment. People feel safe offering perspective because opinions aren't absolute. They don't carry the same fear of failure that answers do. This subtle shift changes the energy of the room. Instead of waiting for someone to risk a definitive solution, voices begin to open. Ideas emerge more freely. Discussions become richer. It also gives you more data, more angles, more of the emotional landscape behind the logic. You hear what concerns people before they harden into resistance. Psychologically, this approach builds buy-in. When people feel they've contributed early, they're more invested in the final decision. Even if it isn't fully their idea, they don't feel dictated to. They feel included. I value your take on this. Walk me through how you see it. You remove pressure, but build engagement. And once that engagement rises, there's one final move that quietly cements your influence, leaving the moment before it starts to fade. Leave early at peak moment. The meeting is going well. The conversation is alive. Energy is high. This is where most people stay too long, enjoying the momentum, letting it slowly drift past its strongest point. You don't. You leave while the energy is still climbing or just as it peaks. The cheat code here is exit timing. The mind remembers endings far more vividly than middles. This is known as the peak end rule. People judge experiences largely by how they felt at the most intense moment and at the conclusion. When you leave while the moment feels strong, you lock that high note into memory. The conversation feels sharper. Your presence feels more powerful. They carry the glow of your exit long after you're gone. In leadership, this keeps teams motivated. In negotiations, it builds leverage. In personal interactions, it leaves people wanting more rather than feeling drained. Let's pause here while we're in a good place. That's a great place to wrap for today. We've made strong progress. I'll leave you with that thought. Exiting early also signals confidence. You don't need to over-explain or force every detail. You trust that what's been said is strong enough to stand on its own. The mind respects brevity wrapped inside strength. But even as you master when to leave, another quiet form of influence happens before words ever leave your mouth. In the smallest, most immediate signal of all, your eyes. Smile with eyes first. The greeting begins. The words haven't arrived yet, but something lands before language. Your expression. Your eyes meet theirs, and for a split second you smile, not with your mouth first, but with your eyes. The cheat code here is subtle emotional signaling. Humans are experts at reading micro-expressions. The eyes carry warmth, safety, and sincerity far more convincingly than words ever can. A smile that starts in the eyes and spreads naturally feels real, trustworthy, grounded. When you smile only with your mouth, it can feel forced, performed. The eyes give you away every time. But when your eyes soften first, the rest of your face follows with authenticity. Good to see you. Glad you're here. Looking forward to this. The words matter less than the emotion delivered silently before them. In negotiations, this puts others at ease. In tense conversations, it calms anxiety. In leadership, it radiates quiet confidence that invites cooperation. People trust you faster when they feel you're not hiding tension behind polite words. The brain picks up these signals instantly. The small tightening around the eyes, the relaxed forehead, the genuine engagement behind the gaze. It's not something you can fake easily, but you can train yourself to start every interaction with presence. The eyes say, "You're safe here. I'm fully with you." And once that safety exists, people become willing to open far faster, especially when you offer something few expect so early, a secret. Share secrets early. The conversation has barely begun. Trust hasn't fully formed. Most people stay guarded, polite, distant, but you take a small risk first. You offer something unexpected. Can I share something few people know? Here's what most don't realize about me. Early on, I struggled with this too. The cheat code here is early vulnerability, not weakness, but invitation. When you share a personal truth, a small secret, or a behind-the-scenes detail, you trigger something ancient in the human brain, reciprocity. People are wired to match disclosure with disclosure. When you reveal something private or imperfect, you quietly give them permission to open as well. The relationship moves faster, bypassing the usual slow climb toward deeper trust. This works in business, in leadership, in friendships, even in high-stakes negotiations. The secret doesn't have to be large. It only needs to feel real. The goal isn't drama. It's intimacy. A peek behind the curtain that says, "I'm not performing for you. I'm showing you something real." And as they begin opening in return, they feel seen, understood, aligned. He trusts me enough to share that. Maybe I can share too. This exchange transforms surface-level conversations into meaningful ones. Walls lower. Conversations deepen. Influence strengthens. But once they begin to open, your role shifts again. You don't rush forward. You pull gently, with 3 simple words that invite them to keep unfolding. Use "tell me more." They begin to speak. The story unfolds. You nod, listening carefully. And as they reach a pause, you could offer advice, shift the topic, or fill the silence. But instead, you say three simple words. Tell me more. The cheat code here is gentle invitation. These words signal genuine interest without interrogation. They give the person permission to dive deeper into their own thoughts. The mind feels safe, encouraged, even curious about what it might say next. When you say, "Tell me more," you're not pushing. You're creating space. People instinctively fill empty space with more detail, more emotion, more honesty, and often what they reveal after those words carries far greater value than what they offered first. That's really interesting. Tell me more about how you handled that. Tell me more about what was going through your mind then. Tell me more, what happened next. This works because most people crave to be heard fully, but rarely feel they are. You offer them that rare moment where their thoughts aren't being judged or redirected, they're simply being received. In negotiations, this reveals hidden motives. In conflict, it softens defensiveness. In leadership, it earns loyalty. In personal conversations, it creates emotional depth quickly. And as people speak more, they often reveal not only their hopes but also their frustrations, their struggles, their challenges, the forces they feel aligned against. And in those moments, you find a powerful opportunity to create connection through a shared opposition. Use mutual enemies as bonding. You listen as they speak. At first, it's about numbers, options, possible next steps. But slowly, the conversation drifts towards something heavier, something quieter beneath the surface. The real weight doesn't sit inside the decision itself, it sits inside the obstacles that surround it. They describe the slow approvals, the rigid bureaucracy, the teams that won't move, the competitors who keep shifting the rules, and as they reveal it, you don't pull away. You step beside it. This is where the conversation changes. You're no longer a negotiator or advisor sitting across from them. You are standing next to them, both facing the same horizon. You acknowledge the frustration not as a weapon to be used, but as common ground to build upon. You feel how exhausting it has been for them to push forward against resistance that never seems to break. You recognize the invisible pressures that steal momentum long before any decision is made. And in doing so, you shift from outsider to ally. The cheat code here isn't flattery. It isn't about feeding grievances or amplifying negativity. It's about subtle alignment. Human beings trust those who face a shared enemy with them, even if that enemy is not a person but a system, a pattern, a persistent force that neither of you control. By recognizing it out loud, you give shape to the struggle that already lives inside them. And once named, it stops being their private frustration. It becomes something both of you carry together. There's a quiet bond that forms in these moments. No declarations, no grand speeches, just a recognition that you see what they've been fighting. And inside that recognition, defenses lower, resistance dissolves. Decisions become easier, not because you've forced agreement, but because the person no longer feels alone inside the uncertainty. And once you've created that shared space, a new current begins to flow beneath the conversation. One where you no longer have to argue for your solution directly, because you've already begun carrying them toward it. And from there you begin speaking as if the outcome is no longer in question at all. Act as if outcome is certain. The negotiation hasn't ended. The decision remains on the table. Questions still hover in the room. And yet you speak as though the agreement is already unfolding. Not out of arrogance, not as a tactic of force, but as a quiet statement of inevitability. You say, once we finalize this, we can immediately begin coordinating the next steps. You suggest when your team gets started on implementation, you'll notice results within the first cycle. You continue. After we move forward, the adjustment phase will only take a few weeks. The cheat code here isn't confidence as performance, it's psychological momentum. The mind naturally follows direction that feels pre-decided. When you frame the outcome as already accepted, you invite the other person to mentally step into the future rather than continue weighing the risks of the present. You eliminate the discomfort of indecision by gently moving their thoughts beyond the decision itself. People fear choice far more than they fear action. The moment a decision feels already made, the anxiety tied to uncertainty fades. Their mind begins focusing on the steps ahead, on the practical, the manageable, the familiar. You aren't removing their control, you're removing their hesitation. This pattern works because humans are deeply uncomfortable with conflict between what they imagine and what they resist. The more vividly you describe the post-decision world, the more difficult it becomes for them to hold on to their doubts without creating internal dissonance. The future you paint begins pulling them forward, not through pressure, but through expectation. And once that expectation lives inside them, you accelerate the process even further, not by pushing harder, but by carefully tightening the clock they believe is running. Because even when the decision is nearly made, many people hesitate for one simple reason: they believe there's still time. Set artificial deadlines. The conversation moves forward. The agreement feels close. The resistance has softened. They're leaning toward yes, but something invisible still holds them back. It isn't fear. It isn't disagreement. It's simply the belief that time remains. The mind loves delay. As long as tomorrow exists, there's comfort in waiting. Decisions postponed feel safer than decisions made. Certainty can always wait for more data, more discussion, more alignment. You take that comfort away, gently. We'll need to have this finalized before month end to secure the scheduling window. Once we pass this phase, we'll lose the current resource availability. The next review cycle closes by Friday, so we should have clarity by then. The cheat code here is not about pressure, it's about closure. You introduce artificial, yet believable, boundaries around the decision window. Not threats, not ultimatums. Simple realities that suggest the luxury of indefinite reflection no longer exists. The brain responds differently when choice is framed inside a window. What once felt like an open field now becomes a narrowing path. Action feels necessary. Delay feels costly. People stop evaluating whether they agree in principle and begin preparing for action simply because the timeline no longer allows endless postponement. Artificial deadlines are powerful because they don't feel forced. You're not removing their choice. You're changing how long the choice remains available. The uncertainty of decision shrinks because the space for indecision shrinks, and as their mind moves closer to commitment, you quietly strengthen the emotional bond that will hold everything together once the decision is made, not by praising them directly, but by letting praise find its way to them indirectly. Compliment behind their back. The conversation may have ended, but your influence hasn't. Long after meetings close and deals are made, you still have quiet tools to strengthen trust without even speaking directly to the person. You speak well of them when they aren't there. She handled that entire process with real discipline. His insight shaped a lot of how this came together. Honestly, we couldn't have made progress without their work. The cheat code here is indirect reinforcement. When people hear that you've praised them to others, their trust deepens in ways no direct compliment could achieve. The words feel more authentic, more earned, because they weren't designed to manipulate or flatter in the moment. They existed when you had nothing to gain from saying them. Human psychology responds more powerfully to third-party recognition. When someone else reports your compliment, it carries more weight than if you delivered it yourself. It signals integrity. It shows that your respect isn't performance, it's consistent. Even when the compliment eventually reaches them, it lands softer, deeper. It feels like a reflection of how you truly view them, rather than something said to secure favor. And long after that small moment, they carry that knowledge quietly. He values my work even when I'm not in the room. She respects me without needing to say it to my face. This creates loyalty. It builds alliances. It anchors your leadership, your influence, and your relationships in something far sturdier than simple verbal praise. But even as you strengthen bonds through these subtle signals, another quiet moment often appears, a moment where someone reveals something unexpected. They say something surprising. And instead of reacting or correcting, you open the door wider. What made you say that? Ask what made you say that. The person across from you speaks. They share a thought, an assumption, an unexpected opinion. In that moment, many would react, correct, argue, explain. But you pause. You don't push back. Instead, you invite them to pull you inside their thinking. What made you say that? The cheat code here is not confrontation, but exploration. The question doesn't challenge their statement. It turns their comment into a doorway. You're asking not what they think, but how they arrived there. And in doing so, you gather the most valuable currency in any conversation, the architecture of their reasoning. When people explain the process behind their belief, they often reveal far more than they intend. You hear their hidden assumptions, their priorities, their fears, and the quiet influences that shape their view. And often they hear it too, sometimes for the first time. This question disarms because it doesn't feel aggressive. It carries no immediate pressure to defend. Instead, it creates space for reflection. You're signaling curiosity, not opposition. And inside that calm space, people are far more willing to re-examine their own views. Psychologically, it serves both you and them. You gain insight, they gain clarity. And together, you move closer to understanding not just the surface disagreement, but the root from which it grows. What made you say that? Slows the emotional rush that often hijacks difficult conversations. It turns conflict into dialogue. It helps people hear themselves while you listen patiently, guiding the discussion without resistance. And once they've opened up, once they've pulled apart their own reasoning, you create the perfect space to soften the tension even more by stepping forward with something very few expect from someone in control, a quiet dose of self-deprecation. Disarm with self-deprecation. The tension rises, the room tightens, eyes watch you, waiting to see how you'll position yourself, how you'll defend, correct, or establish your authority. And this is where most people push harder, trying to control the moment through dominance. But you don't. You take a step most never expect. You lower yourself, deliberately, carefully, and strategically. I've made that mistake more times than I can count. Honestly, I still get this part wrong sometimes. That's exactly the kind of thing I overlook when I'm not paying attention. The cheat code here is voluntary imperfection. Self-deprecation, used with precision, disarms resistance faster than almost any argument. It lowers defenses, softens egos, and invites the other person into a space where cooperation feels safer than competition. When you acknowledge your own flaws, you signal that the conversation isn't about proving who's right. It's about finding truth together. The person across from you no longer feels attacked or evaluated. They feel respected, even protected. You've surrendered a piece of your armor, and in doing so, you make it safe for them to relax their own. But this isn't about weakness. The key is control. You reveal only what you can afford to reveal, small admissions that show humanity without sacrificing competence. You don't undermine your authority. You strengthen it by making it approachable. People trust those who seem secure enough to admit where they stumble. I've had my share of bad calls on this too. That part still trips me up more often than I'd like. The humility creates warmth. The warmth creates trust. And trust makes people far more willing to follow your lead, not because you force them, but because they've chosen you. And once they're leaning in, you continue guiding them forward, not with new arguments or hard pivots, but with something far more subtle, repeating their own words back to them. Repeat key words casually. They speak. They explain. Their words carry not just information but emotion, phrases they've chosen carefully, sometimes unconsciously, to reveal what matters most to them. And as they speak, you listen closely, not only to understand, but to collect. And then you return their own language back to them. So you're saying the uncertainty feels risky. It really is about stability, isn't it? That timeline feels tight, just like you mentioned earlier. The cheat code here is subtle reinforcement. When you repeat their key words casually, you signal that you've heard them not just at the surface, but at the emotional level beneath their reasoning. You mirror their language back without judgment, without forcing agreement, simply reflecting their own framework. This repetition calms resistance. The brain finds comfort in hearing its own language reflected. The person feels seen, understood, and quietly validated. Their defenses lower because they sense alignment, even if no agreement has yet been reached. More importantly, by adopting their language, you gently shift the frame of the conversation onto shared ground. You're not introducing foreign concepts they must adopt. You're building upon the language they've already claimed as their own. This approach works especially well when conversations become delicate. In negotiations, repeating their phrasing creates momentum without pressure. In conflict, it prevents escalation. In leadership, it allows people to remain open while still feeling ownership over the direction. The mind relaxes when its words are returned gently. And in that space of comfort, you earn the right to take the conversation even deeper. By inviting them to point out what you haven't yet seen. Ask, "What am I missing?" The discussion reaches a point where you've presented your view. The facts are clear. Your argument is sound, but instead of locking your position in place, you do something different. You open the door even wider. What am I missing? The cheat code here is controlled vulnerability paired with authority. By inviting them to critique your thinking, you signal strength without rigidity. You're not conceding weakness. You're demonstrating that your confidence isn't fragile. The person across from you no longer feels the need to force their disagreement because you've already created space for it. Psychologically, this question disarms resistance. People no longer have to defend themselves against your idea because you've just made it clear you're open to refinement. And when people feel invited into the process, they often reveal concerns that otherwise would have remained hidden beneath quiet doubt. You also gain valuable insight. What they choose to mention or avoid mentioning tells you far more about their true priorities than any formal objection would. Often what emerges isn't a direct counterargument, but the emotional hesitation that sits behind their uncertainty. The plan looks strong, but I just wonder if timing might become tight if X happens. The approach makes sense. My only concern is how the other team might respond. In leadership, this approach builds loyalty. In negotiation, it uncovers hidden obstacles before they become deal breakers. In conflict, it lowers the temperature, allowing both sides to focus on resolution rather than defense. You're not exposing yourself to attack, you're giving them permission to participate. And once they feel they've contributed, their commitment to the final outcome deepens naturally. But even as you guide these open discussions, there are moments where speaking less becomes even more powerful, where you drop your volume, not to retreat, but to command the room's full attention. Lower voice to gain attention. The discussion builds. Voices rise, not always in anger, but in energy. Words quicken. Tension sharpens. The air thickens with competing points and unspoken urgency. Most people match that rising volume, believing strength lives in speaking louder, filling space, asserting control through force. But you do the opposite. You lower your voice. The cheat code here is simple. Volume commands attention not by rising, but by falling. When you drop your voice, you create contrast. The surrounding noise feels amplified, and your words cut through that noise precisely because they arrive softer, steadier, more deliberate. The human mind is wired to chase what feels scarce. In a loud room, quiet pulls focus. The listener leans in, both physically and mentally, because your lower tone demands presence without demanding aggression. You're not shouting to be heard. You're making it impossible not to listen. Let's pause here for a second. Here's where this really matters. There's one piece we can't overlook. Lowering your voice signals confidence. You're in control of yourself, which suggests you're in control of the moment. You create gravity around your words simply by forcing the listener to come closer, not with movement, but with attention. This approach works in negotiations where stakes rise. It calms escalating conflict. It resets tense group dynamics. You create a pocket of stillness inside chaos, and inside that stillness, your words carry more weight than volume ever could deliver. People follow calm and storm. They mirror your composure, and once you've grounded the room with your controlled voice, you unlock an even deeper form of influence, the ability to let silence speak when emotions peak. Because sometimes the most powerful move in heated moments is not saying anything at all. Use quiet when emotions rise. The conversation turns sharp. Emotions begin to swell. Faces tighten. Voices quicken. The words come faster now, not always louder, but charged with something heavier beneath them. Many try to push through these moments, believing that more words will break the tension, that explanations will calm the storm. But you know better. You let the quiet arrive. The cheat code here is restraint. Silence in the middle of emotion does what words cannot. It absorbs the heat without feeding it. The person across from you expects resistance, correction, or defense, but instead they're met with stillness. And in that stillness, their emotional momentum has nothing to push against. The anger, frustration, or anxiety begins to slow, not because you've argued it away, but because there's nothing keeping it alive. This isn't avoidance. You're not retreating. You're creating space for emotion to lose its force naturally. The brain struggles to sustain high emotion without external fuel. The absence of immediate reaction removes the oxygen. And as the emotional wave weakens, what remains is a person more capable of returning to reason. Silence also signals control. You're not afraid of their emotion. You're not rushing to correct or repair. You're waiting for clarity to return because you trust your steadiness more than the volatility of the moment. I can see this matters deeply. Let's take a breath before we continue. I want to give that space. Take your time. The very act of pausing communicates strength, patience, and respect. The other person feels seen rather than challenged. They recognize your presence without feeling the need to defend their emotions further. Once emotions settle, real problem-solving can begin again. And often after weathering emotional waves together, even small next steps feel far easier to propose because you've proven yourself as a calm, steady partner. And from that new, quieter place, you ask not for everything, but for something small they can easily say yes to. Ask for small, early commitments. The conversation has stabilized. Emotions have softened. Agreement may not be complete, but resistance has weakened. This is not the moment to demand everything. It's the moment to ask for something they can easily say yes to. Why don't we schedule the first review call? Shall we begin gathering the initial data? Let's draft a simple outline to explore next steps. The cheat code here is early micro-commitment. Human psychology resists large leaps but comfortably accepts small steps. Once a person agrees to something minor, they've already crossed the invisible threshold from indecision into action. And with every small yes, momentum quietly builds. This is known as the commitment consistency principle. The mind prefers to stay consistent with its previous actions. Each agreement, no matter how small, subtly rewires the brain toward completion. Future decisions feel less like fresh commitments and more like natural extensions of choices already made. You're not asking for final approval or full buy-in. You're asking for participation, involvement, movement. And movement creates emotional investment. Even the act of scheduling a meeting, assigning a task, or reviewing an outline signals progress. The person has now become part of the process, no longer standing entirely outside of it. They've crossed the first line. We don't need to finalize today. Let's simply take the first step. In leadership, this lowers resistance to change. In negotiation, it opens doors without triggering defenses. In conflict resolution, it rebuilds cooperation without demanding full surrender. Once people begin moving, they rarely stop. The small first action becomes the weight that shifts the balance. But before asking for these small commitments, another subtle move strengthens your position even further. The brief, deliberate pause before you speak. Delay the first answer briefly. The question arrives. Everyone watches. The tension leans forward. Most people respond quickly, eager to appear prepared, eager to demonstrate certainty. But you don't rush. You allow a small, intentional pause to fill the space. You breathe, you think, you wait. The cheat code here is controlled delay. By not answering immediately, you signal calm authority and invite attention to sharpen. The pause serves as a subtle display of confidence, not because you have nothing to say, but because you are choosing when and how to say it. The human mind assigns meaning to timing. Quick answers can feel reactive, rehearsed, or defensive. But when you pause, you imply depth beneath your words. You give the impression that your response is considered, not automatic. People naturally lean in, anticipating something more thoughtful, more stable. The pause also gives you the gift of clarity. In those few quiet seconds, your mind organizes what matters most. You're not buying time because you're unprepared. You're controlling the tempo of the conversation. Let me think about that for a moment. That's a good question. Here's how I see it. There are a few ways to look at this. This brief hesitation transforms the energy in the room. You lead not by filling space, but by allowing space to exist under your control. And in doing so, you quietly own both the question and the silence surrounding it. But after that pause, after your words arrive, there will still be times when disagreement hovers. When you sense that tension building again, you have a quiet phrase that disarms conflict before it ever fully takes shape. Use "you might be right." The disagreement surfaces. Tension hums beneath the words. They've made a point you don't fully agree with, perhaps not at all. The impulse rises to counter, to correct, to present the better argument. But instead, you disarm the conflict before it grows. You might be right. The cheat code here is soft alignment without surrender. You don't fully concede, you don't give away your position, but you remove the need for the other person to defend themselves further. The simple phrase signals openness, signaling that you're not rigid, that your mind remains flexible enough to consider other views. Psychologically, this shifts the dynamic instantly. The person no longer feels the need to dig in or escalate their argument. You've taken away the battlefield. Their defenses lower because you've created space for both positions to exist momentarily without threat. But underneath that calm, you still hold the direction of the conversation. You follow your gentle concession with a quiet redirect. You might be right, and I wonder how that would play out if we tried it alongside this approach. You might be right. Though there's one more piece I've been considering. The phrase functions like a valve. It releases just enough pressure to keep the dialogue cooperative while allowing you to continue guiding it. The person remains engaged without feeling they've been dismissed or defeated. This technique builds trust over time. The more often people experience your willingness to consider their view without conflict, the more they view you as steady, reasonable, and safe to follow. Authority grows not through dominance, but through controlled humility. And once that emotional safety is in place, even small physical gestures can strengthen the connection beneath your words, sometimes through nothing more than a brief touch as the conversation begins. Touch elbow lightly in greeting. The first few seconds of any interaction carry weight far beyond words. Before a single sentence is exchanged, decisions are already forming, subconsciously, quietly, instinctively. And inside that narrow window, even the smallest gestures hold tremendous power. One of the most overlooked is touch, brief, light, precisely placed. You extend your hand for the handshake, but as you make contact, your opposite hand reaches gently to their elbow. Not forcefully, not awkwardly, just a brief, reassuring touch as the hands meet. The cheat code here is micro-touch, using controlled, respectful physical contact to signal warmth, trust, and familiarity without overstepping boundaries. The elbow is safe territory, non-threatening, non-invasive, but close enough to feel intentional. Human psychology is deeply wired to respond to physical connection. Light touch, at the right moment, lowers cortisol levels, activates oxytocin release, and triggers a sense of bonding, often before either person fully realizes it. In social contexts, it silently communicates, "You're safe here. I'm present with you. We're aligned." Politicians, skilled negotiators, and natural leaders employ this instinctively. The touch anchors the greeting, transforming what could feel transactional into something more personal. It gently speeds up the rapport-building process. But control is critical. Too firm, and it feels manipulative. Too familiar, and it triggers discomfort. The power lives in its subtlety, a brief moment that signals confidence and calm presence without seeking control. This small gesture prepares the emotional field for everything that follows. Walls lower just slightly. Distance shrinks. The other person feels noticed, respected, and quietly reassured. And once this trust begins to take hold, your words begin to carry even more weight, especially when your body language continues to support the message beneath the surface. Because even as you speak, your hands are sending signals of their own. Keep palms visible while talking. The words you speak carry one message. The movement of your hands carries another. Long before your listener processes your argument, their mind scans your body for signals, subtle, often unconscious cues that tell them whether to trust, to relax, or to brace. You keep your palms visible. The cheat code here is open hand signaling. Exposed palms communicate honesty, transparency, and safety. This response is ancient, rooted in the brain's earliest mechanisms for reading threat. Hidden hands once suggested weapons, concealment, or danger. Visible hands suggest there is nothing to hide. When your palms remain open and in view, you invite trust without needing to state it. You allow your words to land more softly because your body is silently reinforcing. You can lower your guard. There's no hidden agenda here. Skilled communicators intuitively know how to use this. In negotiations, leaders place their hands gently on the table, fingers relaxed, gestures open. In conflict, mediators reveal their palms while guiding tense conversations back toward calm. Even in personal moments of vulnerability, a simple upward turn of the hand signals, "I'm open to you." This openness also extends to how you gesture. When you make a point, your hand moves smoothly outward rather than stabbing sharply. You gesture at chest level, not too high, not too wide. The movement feels controlled, but natural, inviting engagement rather than demanding it. Psychologically, visible palms lower defensiveness in your listener before they've had time to build it. You ease their mental tension before it even fully forms. And inside that safety, conversations move forward with far less resistance. But even as you build trust through these subtle gestures, you recognize there are moments when pointing out mistakes directly can reignite defensiveness. Instead, you guide them carefully toward realizing the error on their own. Because when they discover the mistake themselves, the correction belongs to them. Let them discover mistakes. The error sits quietly in the middle of the conversation. You see it clearly. You could name it, point directly to it, correct it with precision, but instead, you hold back. You guide rather than expose. Walk me through how you arrived at that number again. How would that apply if conditions shifted like we discussed earlier? What would happen if we approached it from this angle instead? The cheat code here is self-correction by guided discovery. People resist being told they're wrong, especially when the correction feels sudden or public. But when you create a space where they notice the mistake themselves, their defenses remain untouched. They feel smart for catching it, not embarrassed for missing it. Psychologically, this protects both their ego and the relationship. Being corrected threatens identity. Discovering an error feels like insight, not failure. You're giving them the dignity of owning the correction while still steering the conversation where it needs to go. In negotiations, this keeps dialogue cooperative. In leadership, it protects morale while improving judgment. In conflict, it prevents minor missteps from escalating into arguments about blame. This approach also creates longer-term benefits. People who correct their own mistakes tend to retain the lesson more deeply. The realization becomes embedded in their reasoning, not something reluctantly accepted from outside authority. And all the while, you've kept the relationship strong. They walk away feeling capable, not diminished, more open to your guidance, not guarded against it. But these moments of correction are fragile. They live inside quiet spaces where thought has room to breathe. And that's why your next skill becomes even more powerful. Knowing when not to speak at all. Avoid filling silent pauses. The words settle. The conversation lands in a moment of silence. It hangs, open and unfilled. Most people feel the weight of that pause, like a growing pressure. The urge builds to say something, anything, to close the gap and smooth the discomfort. But you hold steady. You let the silence work for you. The cheat code here is controlled stillness. Silence makes people uncomfortable because it feels like something unresolved, something demanding to be filled. But in negotiation, leadership, and influence, silence often speaks louder than anything you could say. When you refuse to rush into that space, you give the other person room to think and reveal. In that space, they may reflect. They may offer more information than they planned. They may soften their position or uncover concerns they hadn't yet voiced, and often they reveal the deeper layer of their hesitation, their motivation, or their readiness to move forward. I can see you're thinking about that. Take your time. I'm listening. When you resist the urge to fill the gap, you signal confidence. You're not desperate to control every second. You trust the process enough to let thought breathe. And that calm, steady presence influences more than words ever could. Silence also creates a subtle form of social pressure. The longer you remain quiet, the more the other person feels drawn to speak, to clarify, to justify, to meet you inside that quiet space. Often they reveal exactly what you needed to hear without you needing to ask directly. Intense conversations, allowing silence after a difficult question, gives them permission to lower their defenses. In negotiations, it nudges them toward concessions. In leadership, it models patience and presence. But when conflict rises, when emotions threaten to harden positions, there is one gesture more disarming than silence: the willingness to apologize first. Apologize first in conflict. The tension builds, words grow sharp, defenses rise. The conversation that once sought understanding begins slipping into quiet battle, each side quietly fortifying its position. Most people in these moments wait for the other to yield first, fearing that apologizing will appear weak. But you move differently. You apologize first. Before we go any further, I want to acknowledge my part in this. I see now where I might have contributed to the misunderstanding. Let me start by saying I should have handled that better. The cheat code here is preemptive disarmament. A sincere early apology softens the edge of conflict before it fully hardens. You aren't surrendering your position. You're clearing emotional debris from the path. You signal that you're here for resolution, not for victory. Psychologically, the moment you accept responsibility for your share, no matter how small, the other person's defensiveness starts to loosen. The argument stops feeling like a fight and begins to shift into a problem-solving space. Their emotional energy, once focused on defending their ground, now has permission to focus on moving forward. Importantly, apologizing first doesn't require you to assume full blame. You're not collapsing your position or accepting things that aren't true. You're simply removing unnecessary friction, acknowledging where your actions, intentions, or timing may have added weight to the disagreement. In leadership, this creates loyalty. In negotiations, it preserves the relationship while allowing difficult discussions to continue. In personal conflict, it allows healing to begin sooner than anger expects. Once tension dissolves, minds reopen, and when the space is calm again, you can begin leading them into clarity, not by debating abstractions, but by inviting specifics that reveal what truly matters. Ask for specific examples. The conversation turns cloudy. The disagreement sharpens, but not around facts. It sharpens around generalities. Vague concerns fill the air. This approach feels risky. We've had issues like this before. There's just something about it that doesn't sit right. The danger here isn't the disagreement itself, it's the fog. Vague objections are harder to address because they aren't attached to anything solid. You lean in, steady. You don't argue. You don't dismiss. You simply ask, "Can you give me a specific example?" The cheat code here is grounding abstract resistance in concrete reality. Specific examples force both parties to move out of emotion and into evidence. Vague concerns can feel overwhelming when left unchecked. The moment they're tied to actual experiences, they shrink into something manageable. When they offer an example, you gain something far more valuable than just information. You gain clarity. You see the root fear or hesitation driving their reluctance. Often you also see patterns. They're not resisting your proposal. They're protecting themselves from a past failure that may not even apply to this situation. Tell me what happened when that came up before. Help me understand what went wrong last time. What did you see in that situation that we might be missing here? Specifics bring air into the conversation. You move from vague opposition to collaborative analysis, and in that space, solutions become easier to find because the problem is finally visible. You're no longer debating shadows. This approach also protects relationships. You avoid invalidating their concerns while quietly guiding them toward clearer thinking. The objection no longer feels like a personal battle. It becomes a puzzle you're both trying to solve. And once the real problem is visible, you don't attack it directly. You invite them into possibility, gently nudging the conversation forward with one of the most powerful opening lines you can use. Ask, "What if we tried?" The solution still feels distant. The objections may have softened, but the momentum hasn't fully turned. You could argue your case again, pressing your logic one more time. But instead, you lower the pressure and open a door. What if we tried? The cheat code here is soft suggestion framed as joint exploration. This phrase carries no demand, no threat, no hard pivot. It invites imagination rather than resistance. You're not forcing agreement. You're co-creating the path forward. What if we tried starting with a smaller pilot phase? What if we tried merging both approaches to test viability? What if we tried shifting timelines to protect both sides? Psychologically, the phrase does several things at once. First, it allows the listener to remain in control. You're not telling them what should happen. You're simply introducing a possibility that they are free to accept, adjust, or build upon. This keeps defensiveness low while still directing the conversation forward. Second, what if triggers curiosity? The brain leans toward unresolved possibilities. Rather than rejecting your idea outright, the listener begins mentally simulating what that scenario might look like. The idea becomes real in their imagination before any commitment is made, making agreement feel more natural when the time comes. Third, you create shared ownership. You're not dropping a fully formed answer into their lap. You're inviting them to shape it with you. And people are far more willing to support what they feel they helped create. What if we tried isn't about convincing. It's about inviting them to walk forward with you. And while you continue to lead through words, you also pay close attention to what their body reveals, especially in the small, unguarded places where tension leaks out before the mind can hide it. Sometimes you simply glance downward and let their shoes tell you what their mouth won't. Look at shoes to read tension. The conversation unfolds. Words flow, polite and measured. Their face holds the expected expressions, neutral, professional, controlled. But beneath the practiced performance, you search for something more honest, and often you find it where few people look at their feet. The cheat code here is reading tension through posture and foot placement. Unlike hands, face, or voice, consciously managed in moments of negotiation or conflict, the feet often betray what the mind tries to conceal. The nervous system leaks its truth downward. You glance subtly, without interrupting eye contact for long. The direction of their feet tells you more than their words. If their feet point toward you, their mind is open, engaged, curious. If one or both feet shift away, turn toward a door, or point at an exit, some part of them is retreating, either emotionally, mentally, or strategically. You notice tapping, small, rapid toe movements, often signal rising anxiety or impatience. Feet planted firmly and evenly suggest comfort and confidence. A shifting heel, an ankle twisting under the chair, or restless movement signals internal conflict, even while their voice remains calm. In high-stakes conversations, these micro-signals give you an early map of where resistance lives. While their words may sound agreeable, the nervous foot points toward unspoken reservations. You don't confront it directly. Instead, you adjust your pacing, return to questions, or open space for the concern to surface voluntarily. I sense there may be something we haven't touched yet. Let's take a moment. Before we move forward, is there anything still sitting with you? Skilled leaders, negotiators, and interrogators watch feet because the feet often speak first. The calm act of noticing without forcing gives them permission to voice concerns they were preparing to suppress. And by drawing these hesitations out early, you prevent later friction while strengthening trust. But long before these tensions even arise, you begin shaping comfort in the very first moment, sometimes with nothing more than a simple gesture that sends an ancient, universal signal of welcome. You raise your eyebrows, just slightly, at hello. Raise eyebrows slightly on hello. The greeting begins. The first glance, the first second of eye contact. This is the earliest moment of every interaction where impressions form before a single word is spoken. You've prepared your opening words, your tone, your body language, but your face delivers something even faster, often below conscious awareness. Your eyebrows lift slightly. The cheat code here is nonverbal openness. A brief, subtle eyebrow raise is one of the most universally recognized human signals. It communicates acknowledgement, warmth, and a soft invitation. The movement is fast, almost imperceptible, yet deeply wired into how the brain perceives approachability. You aren't performing surprise or exaggeration. You aren't trying to signal dominance or enthusiasm. You're simply offering a flash of recognition. I see you. You're safe here. This is friendly ground. This small gesture taps into primal circuits of trust. In ancient social wiring, a raised eyebrow meant recognition rather than threat. It shows you are open to connection, signaling friendliness without sacrificing authority. Even in high-stakes negotiations or tense discussions, this tiny lift disarms defensiveness before it ever fully forms. You combine it with calm eye contact, a relaxed face, and steady breathing. The result is powerful. The person across from you feels subtly pulled into a cooperative frame before any topic arises. They relax slightly. They lean in just enough. And while they may not consciously register why, they become more open to your presence. Small adjustments at the entrance of conversation shift the entire rhythm that follows. Because once the atmosphere feels safe, you quietly take control of the most important piece of the interaction. What you talk about first. Control first topic of meeting. The greetings end. The formalities fade. The meeting sits on the edge, waiting for direction. In this fragile opening, most people default to small talk or let others steer the agenda. But you take quiet control, not with force but with precision. You choose the first topic. The cheat code here is anchoring the frame. The first issue discussed quietly shapes everything that follows. It sets the tone, the energy, and the emotional atmosphere. If the meeting opens on problems, defensiveness rises. If it begins with progress, optimism blooms. If it starts with complexity, focus sharpens. Before we dive into the full agenda, let's start with the recent progress we've seen. Let's begin by aligning on the key opportunity in front of us. Why don't we open by clarifying our mutual goals for today? By controlling the starting point, you're not manipulating content, you're shaping mental posture. You decide whether the conversation feels tense, collaborative, or creative before any negotiation begins. The first topic also anchors priorities. What opens the meeting signals importance. Even if other topics carry greater weight, the opening issue becomes the lens through which the rest of the dialogue will be filtered. The brain struggles to reset its emotional tone once the frame is set. In leadership, this technique fosters calm confidence. In negotiation, it lowers resistance. In conflict, it diffuses tension before stakes escalate. And once the atmosphere is aligned, you increase your influence even further, not by seizing control of pacing, but by offering them the next choice that makes them feel empowered inside your structure. When would you like to move forward? Would you prefer to handle this today or after we've reviewed the draft? Because while you hold the frame, you let them feel in control of time. Let them choose timing. The decision stands in front of them. The proposal is clear, the direction mapped, but hesitation remains, not in the content, but in the pace. People often resist not because they oppose the idea itself, but because they feel cornered by timing they don't control. You remove that pressure without losing momentum. When would you feel most comfortable moving forward? Shall we schedule this for this month or early next? Would you prefer to start after your team's review or before? The cheat code here is controlled flexibility. You allow them to choose the rhythm while keeping the direction intact. The destination remains the same, only the pathway adjusts. This simple act creates an immediate sense of autonomy, one of the deepest psychological needs in any decision-making process. When people feel forced into urgency, their resistance grows, not always to the proposal itself, but to the feeling of being rushed. But when you offer timing as their choice, you lower that resistance while still keeping them within your frame. Even as they select the pace, they remain inside the structure you've designed. You're not surrendering control, you're giving the appearance of freedom while guiding the flow. The choice of timing becomes a soft commitment, an emotional pre-acceptance of the outcome that's already taking shape. This technique works because you've quietly shifted their role from evaluator to participant. They are no longer deciding if they'll move forward. They're deciding when, and that mental shift is often enough to solidify their internal agreement. Once people make even a small voluntary decision, their mind begins to align with it. The next steps feel like a continuation, not a leap. And as that quiet momentum builds, you strengthen it even further, not by waiting for them to imagine success, but by planting it before the process even begins. Because the mind walks more confidently toward a future when you've already described its success. The meeting hasn't begun. The details haven't been debated. Yet before any offer is laid on the table, you quietly shift their expectations with a few carefully chosen words. You plant an image of success before any obstacles even rise. I'm confident we'll find a solution that works for both sides. Predict success before negotiation. These conversations usually lead to something we're both happy with. Based on everything we've seen so far, I expect this will land in a good place. The cheat code here is pre-framing outcome certainty. Before the first real negotiation unfolds, you begin shaping their emotional posture. You're not promising results or making guarantees. You're simply projecting calm inevitability. The conversation is no longer framed as a conflict, but as a collaborative process already moving toward agreement. Psychologically, this activates a subtle bias called expectancy anchoring. The brain, once exposed to a likely outcome, begins unconsciously seeking confirmation of that outcome. Their mind starts scanning for alignment rather than conflict. Each point of agreement feels like evidence that things are unfolding as expected. You lower the tension before it builds. They enter the discussion not in a defensive stance, but with an unconscious expectation that resolution is not only possible, it's probable. The future you've described begins pulling them forward before the first issue is even discussed. This also shifts the emotional atmosphere. Negotiations framed as potential conflict often activate zero-sum thinking. If one side wins, the other loses. But when success is projected as mutual from the start, both sides become more willing to explore creative solutions that protect both interests. And once their mind begins traveling toward that shared outcome, you keep the momentum moving, not by abruptly shifting into proposals, but by smoothly introducing points with a phrase that feels casual, harmless, and disarming. Use "before I forget." The conversation flows. They're engaged, speaking freely, laying out concerns and priorities. You listen carefully, waiting for the moment to introduce an important point, an idea, a proposal, or a subtle correction. But rather than forcing your entry or shifting the tone too abruptly, you slide your thought gently into the stream. Before I forget. The cheat code here is disarming insertion. These three words lower defensiveness while allowing you to introduce new information without triggering resistance. The phrase feels casual, natural, and non-confrontational. It suggests you're simply remembering something important, not preparing to argue or push. Psychologically, this technique creates a softer landing for your point. It doesn't feel like a formal transition or a direct challenge. It arrives as a helpful addition to the discussion, framed almost as a favor to both of you, ensuring nothing important gets overlooked. Before I forget, there's one angle we may want to consider. Before I forget, I spoke with the team about that exact issue last week. Before I forget, I've seen something similar play out in another project. By framing your contribution this way, you avoid activating their natural reflex to push back. Instead, they remain receptive, continuing to process your addition as part of the ongoing flow rather than a point of conflict. You're not demanding attention, you're inviting it. This approach also preserves the collaborative rhythm. Instead of interrupting or redirecting the conversation too sharply, you blend your input into the existing structure, making it easier for the person to stay engaged while absorbing your new idea. The effect is subtle but powerful. You guide without tension, steer without resistance, and lead without force. And while your words carry the message, your body continues to reinforce the relationship, especially when you signal through posture that you are fully present and invested in hearing them. Sometimes, all it takes is a slight forward lean. Lean forward slightly when listening. The other person speaks. Their words carry hesitation, excitement, uncertainty, or hope. As they search for the right phrasing, your body sends a message long before your mouth opens. You don't sit back, arms crossed, distant. You lean forward just slightly. The cheat code here is physical engagement without intrusion. That small forward lean does not invade their space, but signals full presence. It's an unspoken declaration. I'm here with you. You have my attention. I'm listening. Psychologically, humans are wired to read posture for safety, connection, and interest. A listener leaning forward gently communicates curiosity and alignment. It creates a safe container for vulnerability to emerge, especially when the conversation carries risk or complexity. In leadership, this posture encourages subordinates to share difficult truths. In negotiations, it reassures the other side that you're not waiting to strike, but willing to understand. In conflict, it dissolves the distance that fuels defensiveness. You aren't just listening to their words, you're listening to their struggle to say them. Your posture says you're not speaking into emptiness. I'm fully present. This slight movement also signals emotional pacing. While aggressive forward leans can feel intimidating or overbearing, a controlled, natural lean holds the space open. You become both participant and guide, allowing the other person to feel both seen and safe. I'm with you. Keep going. I'm following. The body speaks these messages without words. But even as you signal full attention, you also know when to release some of that intensity. Because sometimes, when the conversation turns analytical or explanatory, direct eye contact becomes too heavy. And that's when you use another subtle tool, breaking eye contact at just the right moment. Break eye contact when explaining. The tension eases. The emotional charge has softened. Now comes the part where you lay out reasoning, explain your thinking, or present complex details. Most people instinctively hold eye contact during these moments, believing it signals confidence and authority. But you know that constant eye contact during explanation can feel heavy, too intense, too demanding. You allow your gaze to drift. The cheat code here is controlled eye contact release. As you move into explanation, you break eye contact briefly, glancing downward to the side or toward a neutral space. This signals to their brain, "We're thinking now, not negotiating." When you break eye contact, you create a thinking rhythm. You give both yourself and your listener space to process information. The interaction shifts from a confrontational exchange to a shared exploration. It's no longer me versus you. It becomes us looking at the problem together. Here's how I've been thinking about this. If we approach it from that angle, we reduce risk in these areas. What I noticed when we reviewed the data is this. This shift removes subtle psychological pressure from the other person. When you hold eye contact while explaining, they may feel you're testing their agreement or judging their reactions. But when you look away during explanation, you signal that you're focused on the content, not on forcing immediate response. The moment you finish your point, your eyes return to meet theirs, steady, calm, inviting their input without pressure. You create an alternating rhythm, intensity when connecting, softness when building ideas. This rhythm balances authority with safety. It allows complex discussions to breathe while keeping the relationship stable. And when the conversation approaches its natural close, you bring that personal connection fully back, not through elaborate speeches, but through one of the most powerful triggers of belonging, using their name. Use first names at the end. The conversation reaches its final moments. The major points have been discussed, the emotions softened, the decisions clarified. This is where many simply summarize, shake hands, or drift into polite closure. But you apply one final touch that leaves the strongest imprint, not with more content, but with simple personal connection. You say their name. "I appreciate how you approached this today, Michael." That was a helpful way to look at it, Sarah. Let's move forward on this together, David. The cheat code here is the deliberate use of first names at the end of dialogue. Names are powerful psychological anchors. They are the most personal word in any language for the person hearing them. Even in business, even in tense negotiation, hearing one's own name spoken gently at the end carries weight far beyond the words themselves. When you say their name at the start of a conversation, it opens the door. But when you say it at the end, you close the interaction with quiet warmth and belonging. It signals respect, acknowledgement, and individuality. The person feels seen, not simply as a role or function in the discussion, but as a human being whose presence mattered. Psychologically, names trigger deep recognition pathways in the brain. They reactivate emotional circuits tied to trust, validation, and acceptance. Ending a meeting with a name softly spoken allows your final impression to land more personally, creating loyalty and openness that lingers far beyond the discussion itself. This final imprint makes follow-up smoother, future conversations warmer, and ongoing relationships sturdier. You leave not as a negotiator who won, but as a partner they willingly return to. And while your words have carried much of the weight, your body still plays its role, sometimes through something as simple as where your hand rests as you make your point. A small, steady touch on the table, delivered with quiet intention. Light touch on table builds focus. You reach forward and place a light touch on the table. The conversation is flowing. Ideas bounce back and forth. Points are made. Agreements inch closer. But even in this rhythm, there are moments when attention drifts, when the energy threatens to scatter. You don't raise your voice or forcefully pull attention back. Instead, you let your hand do the work. The cheat code here is physical grounding. That small gesture, subtle, steady, unhurried, anchors not only your own presence, but the attention of everyone in the room. You are drawing invisible boundaries around the moment, signaling that what's being said right now carries weight. Humans are deeply responsive to micro-movements. When you lightly place your fingers or palm on the table while making a point, you create a natural focal point. Eyes follow the movement. The brain unconsciously reads your still hand as a marker of importance. Without needing to say it, you've declared, "Pay attention here." This isn't force. It's not a pounding fist or dramatic display. In fact, its power lies precisely in its restraint. The touch is deliberate but calm, confident but not confrontational. It stabilizes your own delivery while subtly commanding the room's shared focus. Here's where this gets important. If we keep this in mind, everything else aligns. This piece connects everything we've discussed. The physical contact with the table acts like punctuation, a silent full stop beneath your words. It creates a rhythm of control, pacing the flow of conversation while maintaining everyone's engagement. This is especially powerful when paired with steady breathing and deliberate pauses. The combination builds a quiet authority that makes others feel safe following your lead. And once their attention is fully grounded, you invite them to open up further, not by interrogating, but by gently pulling their process into the light. Walk me through it. The issue sits between you. It's complicated. Layers of concerns, unstated assumptions, and hidden calculations. You could challenge their reasoning directly. You could debate each point. But instead, you take the gentler path, one that draws out far more than confrontation ever could. Walk me through it. The cheat code here is guided unpacking. You're not asking for a defense. You're not questioning their conclusion outright. You're inviting them to slow down and reveal the architecture of their thinking. And in doing so, you uncover the real structure of their position, often more revealing than they intended. Psychologically, this question softens the dynamic. It allows them to feel respected as an expert on their own perspective. Rather than feeling interrogated, they feel invited to teach, to explain, to show you how they arrived at their view. And as they do, gaps may surface naturally. Gaps they may even notice themselves as they reconstruct their reasoning aloud. Walk me through how you calculated that projection. Walk me through how the team landed on this approach. Walk me through the concern you're seeing on the client side. You're allowing them to externalize what may still be fuzzy even in their own mind. Many times people hold half-formed objections or instincts they haven't fully examined. The act of walking through their logic forces clarity for both of you. In negotiations, this reveals hidden priorities. In leadership, it uncovers unspoken fears or flawed assumptions. In conflict, it slows reactive energy and replaces it with structured dialogue. The power isn't in the question itself, it's in what follows. You listen without interruption. You observe where they feel confident and where their words hesitate. And when they finish, you've gathered far more than you could have extracted through direct debate. And as you guide these conversations with care, you know how to strengthen relationships not only with the person you're speaking to, but with everyone watching quietly from the edges. Because sometimes real influence comes when you compliment the observer, not the participant. Compliment third-party observers. The conversation unfolds while others watch. Team members, assistants, junior staff, partners seated silently nearby. Their presence is quiet, but their influence lingers. Many overlook these observers, speaking only to the decision-maker. But you know better. You see them. And at just the right moment, you address them, not directly, but with deliberate care. You've clearly built a strong team here. The preparation from your staff has made this so much smoother. I can see how much trust your team has earned on this. The cheat code here is indirect positioning. By praising those around your counterpart, you subtly elevate both the leader and the team together. You're not offering hollow flattery. You're recognizing the system of competence that supports the person you're negotiating with. And in doing so, you reinforce their authority while strengthening the relationship. Psychologically, this moves on multiple levels. For the observers, it builds quiet loyalty. They feel respected, noticed, elevated, more likely to advocate for you in later discussions when the room changes. For the primary decision maker, your compliment reflects back onto their leadership. You're recognizing not just them, but the structure they've built. This technique also lowers defenses. People expect persuasion efforts to focus entirely on the key decision maker. When you spread your attention, it signals confidence. You're not desperate to chase a single source of approval. You're connecting to the whole system. It's clear how well this team communicates behind the scenes. The way your people support each other really shows. The ripple effect is powerful. You quietly build allies throughout the room. You shape the emotional current beneath the negotiation itself. And often those micro-connections become decisive when final decisions form away from the table. But even before these observers become advocates, you build momentum early in the process by offering small, easy victories that lower resistance before it ever has a chance to grow. Allow micro-wins early. Every conversation carries tension in the beginning. Even when both sides want agreement, the mind instinctively braces for conflict, ready to defend its ground. You don't push against that tension. You release it slowly, carefully, by offering early victories they can accept without hesitation. That's a great point. I completely agree with your assessment on that part. You've clearly thought through this piece very carefully. That approach you suggested earlier fits perfectly with the direction we're heading. The cheat code here is engineered micro-wins. You create easy, early moments of agreement that lower defensiveness and build cooperative momentum. These aren't grand concessions or major strategic moves. They're simple acknowledgments of valid points, smart observations, or shared priorities. Psychologically, these small victories trigger a release of resistance. The brain, sensing agreement, relaxes its defensive posture. The conversation stops feeling like a battle for control and begins to feel like a shared construction of solutions. Each micro-win becomes a small investment in continued alignment. As they accumulate, the dynamic shifts. The person begins to experience the conversation not as a negotiation, but as a series of joint successes. Agreement starts to feel natural, inevitable, even safe. Their mind subtly shifts from evaluating whether to trust you to anticipating what new point of common ground you'll discover next. In leadership, these early wins build loyalty and openness. In negotiations, they prevent hard positions from solidifying too early. In conflict, they lower emotional intensity before it can escalate. Exactly, your team's earlier work laid the perfect foundation for this next step. That solution you proposed already addresses several concerns we had coming in. By granting micro-wins, you create forward momentum without sacrificing anything meaningful. And once that forward movement exists, you shape how each idea is delivered by layering your words in a rhythm that the mind finds almost impossible to resist. Because while content matters, structure controls how deeply your words land. And that's where the rule of thirds comes alive. Use the rule of thirds in speech. You deliver your point. The room listens. But you know that how you structure your words shapes not only how they hear you, but how deeply they absorb what you're saying. Rather than unloading everything in one long stream, you break your message into deliberate rhythm, 3 distinct parts. It's clear your preparation was excellent. The analysis was sharp, and your team executed flawlessly. The cheat code here is the rule of thirds. The human brain is naturally drawn to patterns of 3. It processes information in this rhythm more easily. 3 points feel complete, but not overwhelming, balanced but not rushed. The structure creates a subtle sense of mastery and confidence in your delivery. Psychologically, when you present information in groups of 3, the listener experiences your ideas as organized and intentional. They're more likely to trust your competence, even before evaluating your actual content. 3 pieces feel digestible, controlled, persuasive. This approach reduces costs, improves timelines, and strengthens team morale. We addressed the supplier issue, secured better pricing, and locked in delivery dates. The client feels heard, the product fits their needs, and legal is fully aligned. This structure works because it provides enough substance to feel substantive, but leaves space for the listener to process. Longer lists overwhelm. Single points feel weak. But 3 offers just the right cognitive balance to pull the mind forward. Over time, using this rhythm consistently creates a subtle hypnotic cadence to your speech. It trains your listener's brain to expect clarity when you speak, making your leadership feel more grounded, your reasoning more persuasive, and your authority more natural. But even as you structure your words for maximum impact, you know when not to speak at all, especially when you deliver good news. Because sometimes, after a win, silence says more than any words can. Pause after delivering good news. The breakthrough arrives. The decision lands. The tension that once filled the room now dissolves into resolution. You deliver the good news, the agreement, the achievement they've been hoping for. But instead of rushing to fill the moment with more words, you do something far more powerful. You stop. You let the silence hold. The cheat code here is strategic stillness after positive outcomes. In moments of good news, most people feel the urge to elaborate, to explain, to reinforce the win, but this instinct often dilutes the power of the moment. The mind needs space to fully absorb good news, to savor victory, to feel the emotional relief of resolution. When you deliver good news and pause, you create space for the other person to emotionally own the win. They experience it as their success, not simply your announcement. Their brain floods with the chemical reward of satisfaction, endorphins, dopamine, relief, all without interruption. The contract has been approved. Your team's work made all the difference. Psychologically, this amplifies trust and emotional bonding. You allow them to fully experience the positive outcome rather than guiding their reaction. The pause acts as a spotlight, holding the moment in place, letting it linger longer in their memory. In leadership, this cements loyalty. In negotiation, it deepens satisfaction with the agreement. In conflict resolution, it signals closure and peace without forcing celebratory words that may feel hollow. The power lies not in the silence itself, but in your comfort with it. Your willingness to stop speaking shows you are fully at ease, unhurried, unthreatened, in full control of the space. And once the positive emotions have fully landed, you gently guide their mind forward again, not into pressure, but into quiet reflection of what may happen if the opportunity isn't seized. Because sometimes people only move when they glimpse what they might later regret. Call out future regret scenarios. The discussion nears its turning point. They understand the offer. The risks feel managed. The benefits are clear. And yet hesitation lingers. A quiet reluctance to move. Logic isn't the barrier anymore. Emotion is fear of committing, fear of making the wrong call, fear of losing control. You don't push harder. You invite them to glimpse something far more powerful, their own future. I imagine 6 months from now, looking back, we may regret missing this window. I keep thinking how it might feel if we pass on this, only to watch the opportunity slip by. Imagine looking back at this moment, wondering what could have happened if we had acted now. The cheat code here is activating anticipated regret, a subtle form of emotional forecasting. Humans are often more motivated by avoiding future regret than by chasing future reward. We fear loss more than we crave gain. And by quietly placing their attention on the cost of inaction, you help their mind cross the emotional threshold that logic alone often cannot reach. This isn't manipulation. You're not threatening or guilt-tripping. You're simply offering a perspective they haven't fully allowed themselves to feel, a glimpse of what indecision may cost later, when the chance is past and cannot return. Psychologically, this triggers a shift. The question in their mind changes from, is this the right choice, to will I regret not making it? And that small shift often carries far more power than another round of facts or analysis. In leadership, it moves teams through stalled projects. In negotiation, It closes lingering doubts. In conflict, it softens rigid positions by pointing toward what resolution protects against. Sometimes the worst risk isn't acting, it's waiting too long. You allow that thought to sit without rushing, without forcing, letting their mind gently tip toward action. And when the conversation closes, you leave them not just with logic or agreement, but with something deeper, a final unexpected compliment that anchors the entire experience on trust and respect. End with unexpected compliment. The conversation winds down, the decisions have been made, the concerns addressed, the path forward agreed upon. Most people would close here, shaking hands, exchanging formalities, moving on. But you offer one final move, quiet, subtle, and far more lasting than the deal itself. You deliver an unexpected compliment. You navigated this process with a level of clarity most people struggle to reach. Your team's discipline throughout this made my job easier. I've rarely seen someone balance both sides this thoughtfully. The cheat code here is closing with personal acknowledgement. You're not praising the deal. You're praising them, their judgment, their leadership, their patience, their skill, and you're doing it after the outcome has already been secured, when there's no longer any advantage to gain. That timing makes the compliment land with uncommon weight. Psychologically, compliments delivered at the end carry two advantages. First, they solidify emotional memory. People remember how they felt in your presence far longer than they remember the details of what was discussed. Second, because the compliment comes after resolution, it feels sincere, untainted by any attempt to influence. Humans crave recognition, not empty flattery, but quiet validation that their effort, their risk, their decision-making was seen and respected. You give them that dignity. You allow them to leave the conversation not just feeling like they made a deal, but feeling proud of how they made it. In leadership, this builds deep loyalty. In negotiation, it ensures future openness. In conflict resolution, it repairs fractures and leaves the relationship stronger than before. And even as you close with kindness, you know how to prepare for your most delicate moments when you're about to ask for something big. Not by rushing into it, but by allowing one final deliberate pause to pull gravity into the room. Use silence right before big ask. The conversation has reached its edge. You've built trust. You've guided carefully through objections, planted seeds of confidence, framed the possibilities. Now the moment arrives where you must make your ask. The proposal that carries weight, but you don't rush into it. You let the silence arrive first. You pause. The cheat code here is using deliberate silence to magnify importance. Right before you voice your most significant request, you create a vacuum, a brief absence of words that quietly signals, "Pay attention now." The pause serves as a boundary between everything that's come before and the moment that now truly matters. Psychologically, silence creates gravity. The human brain instinctively leans into empty space, searching for what's coming next. That heightened focus makes your ask land with more clarity, more weight, more presence. It allows your words to occupy more space in the listener's mind. Given everything we've aligned on, what I'd like us to move forward with is this. Here's where I believe we're both ready to go next. The pause also serves you. It allows you to collect your energy, steady your tone, and deliver your request not as a plea, not as a gamble, but as something inevitable, already accepted in spirit before it's even spoken. You're not filling space nervously. You're controlling the room without words. You're inviting them into the silence, letting them feel the seriousness of the moment before the ask arrives. And often this very act creates an unspoken readiness in the listener. They feel themselves bracing not for objection but for agreement. But once you've made your ask, you don't immediately pile on explanation or pressure. You leave space again. You allow them to sit with it. And when they hesitate or search for a response, you don't correct. Instead, you invite their wisdom forward, shifting the balance gently by placing the next question in their hands. Ask, how would you handle that? The conversation hovers at a delicate point. You've outlined the problem. The challenge is real. The stakes are clear. Now most would push their solution forward, explaining, convincing, filling the space with justifications. But you hold back. Instead of dictating, you extend an invitation. How would you handle that? The cheat code here is empowered participation. You are not forcing agreement. You are activating ownership. By asking them to step into the problem-solving space, you transform the dynamic. They're no longer evaluating your proposal as an outsider. They're stepping into it as a co-creator. Psychologically, this question activates two powerful instincts. First, it appeals to the need for autonomy. People prefer solutions they feel some control over. Second, it activates problem-solving mode instead of debate mode. They're no longer defending past positions. They're exploring possibilities. This technique also reveals hidden priorities. As they explain how they would approach the situation, you gain valuable insight into their real concerns, their perceived risks, and their unspoken preferences. Often what they say aloud helps them hear their own logic more clearly, sometimes shifting their resistance naturally as they speak. How would you handle scaling that without adding too much overhead? How would you approach protecting both timelines and budgets? How would you balance the short-term risk with long-term growth? The question invites partnership rather than opposition. And once they begin participating in the solution, they become emotionally invested in seeing it succeed because now it's partly theirs. In leadership, this builds long-term buy-in. In negotiation, it creates momentum toward compromise. In conflict, it transforms adversaries into collaborators. But even when plans stumble, even when setbacks surface, you continue guiding the conversation toward forward movement, not by hiding failure, but by reframing it into something far more valuable: information. Frame failure as valuable data. The plan doesn't unfold as expected. The outcome falls short. The instinct for most is to defend, to explain, to assign blame, or to retreat into frustration. But you move differently. You step into the failure not as a loss, but as raw material. This is useful. We've just uncovered something we wouldn't have seen without testing it. That reaction tells us exactly where we need to adjust next. The cheat code here is failure reframing. You strip failure of its emotional charge and reposition it as valuable information. You're not minimizing mistakes. You're elevating their utility. Every misstep becomes a signal, a data point, a missing piece now revealed. The conversation moves away from shame and regret and toward refinement. Psychologically, this approach does two things simultaneously. First, it preserves forward momentum. Instead of getting stuck in emotional spirals, your team or counterpart remains engaged in problem-solving mode. Second, it lowers defensiveness. When failure is treated as data, people feel safe admitting what went wrong, which surfaces better information and leads to sharper corrections. Now we know exactly how that variable behaves under pressure. That outcome exposed what we hadn't factored in yet. We've gathered far more useful input from this than we would have with early success. You teach those around you, through your language and posture, that setbacks are not verdicts. They are simply the system showing you where reality lives. The faster you extract that information, the faster you sharpen your approach. In leadership, this builds resilient teams that adapt rather than fear mistakes. In negotiation, it transforms failed offers into recalibration rather than collapse. In conflict resolution, it shifts blame into insight, allowing relationships to survive strain. And with each recalibration, each course correction, you preserve the emotional stability that keeps conversations alive. You teach those across from you that no single outcome ever defines the process. Because true control lives not in never failing, but in never letting failure close the conversation. You've just gone through some of the simplest, most overlooked tools that shape how people think, decide, and respond. Small shifts, tiny adjustments, the kind that most never even notice until they work. If this gave you something useful, let me know in the comments. If you want more of these real-world tools, subscribe to the channel. And if you found this helpful, a like helps more people find it too. Thanks for watching.